is closed at Glenluce after an accident causing queues. On the M1 in Nottinghamshire, 2 lanes are closed southbound with someone's broken down between junctions 26 and 25 near Nottingham, causing queues. On the M42 in Warwickshire, there's a lane closed southbound after an accident between junctions 7 and 6 from the M6 to the A45 with queues towards there. And on the M6 in Warwickshire, there are 2 lanes closed southbound where a lorry caught fire between junctions 4 and 3 from the M42 to Coventry, taking 40 minutes in the queues towards there. In Monmouthshire, the A4042 is closed at Llanover after an accident. In Torvine, the A4043 is closed at Blenarvan after an accident. And on the M4 in Berkshire, 2 lanes are closed eastbound where a lorry caught fire between the Menbury services and junction 14 at Hungerford, causing queues. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 p.m.
Yes, has common sense won the day at the NHS? Yes, so someone seems to have woken up and realised people are more interested in the NHS making sick people better than calling them by the correct pronoun. Health Secretary Victoria Atkins is making changes to the NHS constitution, which will see phrases like chest feeding and people with ovaries outlawed. Even Keir Starmer is getting on board.
To get the clarity, is it right or is it wrong for Rosie Duffield to say only women have a cervix?
Well, look, biologically, she, of course, is right about that.
So do you owe her an apology?
Well,
yes. Do you owe her an apology? This has been somewhat ongoing. But actually, Cressida, the NHS constitution, my understanding is it has to be changed or ratified by the Health Secretary every 10 years.
Yeah.
So it feels like this is coming more from the government and not actually coming from the NHS at all.
Oh, you mean because it's just time? It's just like, it's time to have a look at the lease sort of thing. The 10 years are up.
But it's just that also a lot of NHS leaders are kind of saying, oh, no, we should not do this or there's going to be complications. It feels like it's not coming. It feels like the NHS is still institutionally captured and this is the government going, finally, no, enough is enough. Sex matters.
Right, yeah. So, OK, so I said there was nothing Rishi could do. I mean, this helps, doesn't it? It's time. It's time. That was fun watching that. I'd like that to have gone on a bit longer. I think the bit I was really going to enjoy was when he did or didn't give his apology. That's what I'd like to
Well, also, I think they should have just brought Rosie Duffield in. We've got Rosie here!
Oh, fantastic. Yes, like a sort of 90s Cilla Black.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Matthew, tonight I'm Rosie Duff.
Yes.
I'm dry ice.
Surprise. What's the question? Has common sense prevailed?
Well,
yes,
I mean, but you say it's got... That's my fear of it.
Morning, 9:30 on Tuesday, the 21st of May. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Very good morning. Thanks for joining us. So, comprehensive compensation. Ministers will set out the details of a £10 billion package for the victims of the infected blood scandal later. Here is Rishi Sunak reacting to the inquiry yesterday.
The people and institutions in which we place our trust failed in the most harrowing and devastating way.
And the Prime Minister's in Vienna asking for support, and he's getting it for his Rwanda migrant scheme. He's been speaking exclusively to GB News, and we're going to bring you that shortly.
And XL bully dogs. Another dog has killed its owner. A woman in her 50s has been mauled to death by her own dogs at home in East London yesterday. The 2 registered dogs have been seized.
Boot camp for the jobless. Out-of-work Britons are going to be offered training to plug gaps in the labour market which were filled by overseas workers. Why offer? Why not make them?
And Andrew's book launch for Finding Margaret took place last night. Look at that. There is you with one of your favourite women.
Yeah.
And also...
And Joan Collins.
And me.
The great Dame Joan Collins was there. Yeah, as was Bev Turner with her young man. He's very young.
It was a lovely do, though, wasn't it? And it's an amazing story.
It was a great turnout too, and so it was great.
Yeah.
And so the book comes out on Thursday.
Super. Right. Let us know your thoughts this morning. gbnews.com. Get involved with the programme and each other. You can talk to each other on there as well. First, though, the very latest news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you very much. The top stories from the GB Newsroom. The government will outline how it plans to compensate the victims and families of the infected blood scandal when it makes a statement in the Commons today. The Prime Minister apologised yesterday after the infected blood inquiry published its final report into the scandal, blaming failures on successive governments, the NHS and blood services. Since the 1970s, 30,000 people were infected with HIV and hepatitis through contaminated blood products and transfusions. Around 3,000 have since died. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has pledged to pay victims back as part of a £10 billion package. Well, the Prime Minister is in Vienna for talks with the Austrian Chancellor about illegal migration. Rishi Sunak arrived at the Chancellery, greeted by Austria's Karl Nehammer. A red carpet was rolled out to welcome him. 15 EU countries, including Austria, signed a letter calling on the European Commission to tighten migration policy and to look at third country schemes. Their meeting comes as the government promised an extra £25 million for the National Crime Agency to tackle people smuggling gangs. At a press conference this morning, Rishi Sunak said the criminal gangs are growing in strength and business as usual won't solve the problem.
People are losing their lives as they are exploited by these criminal gangs, and it is of course a threat to our stability, to the rule of law, and rightly our citizens are demanding that their leaders, their politicians, tackle it. We have to think creatively. We have to pursue new ideas, new solutions and deterrents, removals to safe third countries like the UK's pioneering Rwanda scheme. And as Carl said, it's increasingly clear that many other countries now agree that that is the approach that is required. Bold, novel, looking at safe country partnerships.
Meanwhile, during a visit to Essex Police's headquarters, the Home Secretary has insisted the government is still determined to stop the boats as migrant channel crossings near 10,000 for the year so far. James Cleverly has said people smugglers have changed the way they operate when he was questioned over why the number of migrants arriving in the UK continues to rise. And Brits out of work in the UK will be offered places on skills boot camps as the government aims to plug gaps in the labour market previously filled by overseas workers. Benefits claimants will be given training for roles in key sectors facing shortages, including hospitality, care, construction and manufacturing. In a speech today, the Work and Pensions Secretary Mel Stride is expected to say that the UK has relied on foreign labour for too long and he's determined to put that right. It comes after the Home Office announced a number of restrictions to cut the number of people entering the country and ahead of official net migration statistics to be published on Thursday. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Good morning, 9:35. We're a little bit foggier in the head this morning, having been to Andrew's lovely book launch last night.
That's the book.
This is the book.
Margaret.
And my other half gave it to him and said, would you sign something nice to Bev inside it? Couldn't bring himself to do that. So he did write it to my mother, to Joyce. I love Bev, really. Honest.
There we are, you see.
Andrew Pierce.
There we are.
I think he protested too much. No, but it was a really fun do, and Joan Collins was there, of course.
She made a lovely speech.
How old is she now?
She will not thank me for answering this question, but she has already had her 90th.
She is extraordinary. And actually, not just that she doesn't look 90, the fact that she stood up, spoke without any kind of card, just spoke from the heart, took the mickey out of you a little bit.
A lot, which is fine.
It was a really good event, and actually, you know, the story itself is so remarkable. And as you said last night on the stage, you presume that an adoption story is going to be all kind of Davina McCall, and it's going to be lovely, and there's going to be happy music, and it isn't that story.
Doesn't always work out like that.
Doesn't have the twist.
Because I did find my birth mother. That's what the story's about, finding Margaret, and it wasn't as you might expect. Who would have thought that my birth mother would have been 3 weeks from her 35th birthday when she had me in 1961.
Yeah.
What single mothers were 35 in 1961? Extraordinary.
Yeah, it is extraordinary.
So I've just delved and then the extraordinary story about my birth father, or not.
And I don't think this story is quite finished yet as well, because you've still got to meet, haven't you, your half-siblings, the children your mother went on to have.
She had 4 children. She got married while I was still in the orphanage.
Yeah.
Good luck to her, because she wanted to find some happiness, and I don't resent her for that. She died a few years ago, and I was actually at the funeral.
Well, there's more to come from this story, but
there is.
Yeah, it's really good.
So Bev was there with a very young man. Very young man. Very charming, because I know he'd be watching. Very charming, very charming. And
you were flirting with him.
I was not.
Oh, you were. You were definitely flirting with him a little bit. Was. But also, I met your lovely young man as well.
Were you flirting with him?
It was very nice.
Been a bit of a waste of time.
Now then, should we move on?
Yeah, I think we should.
9:38.
The government is going to outline its plans to compensate the victims and families of the infected blood scandal. Can I just say here again, why is it the taxpayer, again, that's going to have to do this? Because when we say the government is going to compensate, it means everybody watching this, everybody listening to this, it's our money. And it was a day of shame for the way the NHS behaved, the way ministers behaved, and the terrible cover-up.
Correct. It's being called a day of national shame. The Prime Minister apologised after the infected blood inquiry published its final report into the scandal. He blamed it on failures of successive governments, the NHS and blood services. Blood services basically means the drug companies, right? The pharmaceutical companies.
Who in the United States have paid vast sums of compensation. Why aren't they doing it here?
Yeah.
Now, in a very chilling section of the inquiry, it found that boys at Lord Mayor Treloar College in Hampshire were used as objects for research. Listen to this figure. Only 30 of 122 boys with haemophilia at that school in the 1970s and 1980s have survived. They were effectively killed.
It's outrageous.
It's shocking.
It
feels like eugenics.
There are calls for Lord Ken Clarke, the former Health Secretary, to lose his peerage over this. Here he is, giving evidence at the inquiry.
Why do we have to go in such meticulous detail through who said what when, and when did he change his mind? And I do seem to have changed my mind, yes. It didn't make any difference, did it? What happened on the ground?
Not for me to answer questions.
Well, it is. What's the relevance of all this? What difference did it make on the ground?
Well, joining us now is political correspondent for The Spectator, James Heal, and political editor of the HuffPost, Kevin Schofield. The arrogance that drips off Ken Clarke in that clip just kind of, for me, explains why this particular issue was kicked down the road for so many years, James, if politicians had that opinion.
Yes, so Ken Clarke was the junior minister at the beginning of the 1980s when the news was starting to come out that AIDS was linked to these blood transfusions. And I think, you know, someone like that who went on the record and defended what the government was doing at the time, you might think have a bit more contrition in his statement. And, you know, that evidence given in 2021, by that point, of course, it was clear we'd had decades of these stories. We all knew what the evidence was pointing to. And you'd think someone like that would be a bit more humble in that position. And so I think that's what people are focusing on. I think what happened 30 years or so ago, people can go, well, it was in line with the science and government opinion at the time. But Ken Clarke's evidence was extraordinarily combative. And I think maybe Andrew would agree with me, perhaps, the image of Ken Clarke as a sort of cuddly Tory of the 2020s, very different to the 80s, of course. He was a bit of a bruiser, a big cabinet hitter. And I think we saw a touch of what he was like then.
I completely agree with that, James. And Kevin Schofield, he emphatically denied any link between blood and AIDS, and yet we already knew it was becoming increasingly obvious there was a direct link. And the very following year, his own government sanctioned those extraordinary advertisements. Remember the great tombstones to warn people about AIDS and the possibility of unprotected sex. So he seems to me to be in a lot of difficulty. Should we be talking about taking his peerage away, which would be an unusual step?
It really would be an unusual step, but I think it's a legitimate debate to be had. I think I can absolutely understand why the victims are so angry at his arrogance. You just saw it there in that clip of the way that he answered questions, as James says, very combative, no contrition whatsoever. And really, the families deserve answers, as you say, as to why Ken Clarke took the position that he did in the 1980s, despite the evidence. We already knew then, or government officials already knew then, that there was a link between blood products and AIDS, and yet Ken Clarke was arguing as Health Secretary that was not the case. And here we are all these years later, and he doesn't seem to have shifted his position. So, yeah, I think it is a legitimate question. It's one, obviously, for the Forfeitures Committee. It's highly unusual for them to remove a peerage, but absolutely I can understand why people are at least raising that as an issue, given the strong criticism of Ken Clarke in the report and, as we've just seen there, the evidence that he gave during the inquiry itself.
And James, what about the idea of the drugs companies getting involved here, or even criminal prosecutions? Because in France, back in 1999, 3 government ministers were prosecuted, 1 successfully. People were sent to prison who were worked in the blood industry, if I could put it that way. There's no talk yet so far, despite the report yesterday, of criminal prosecutions. And I can't for the life of me think, why not?
Well, I think that, unfortunately, due to a lot of the people being involved are now dead, perhaps the lack of people who you can identify for criminal prosecutions is one practical hurdle. But I think you're right, Andrew, to have that conversation. I think what we're going to see today is a conversation around the compensation, how the taxpayer is going to pay for it, if that's in line with the recommendations of the inquiry. But I suspect in the coming days we're really going to see a lot of that. And I think in this country, we often have a really bad tradition, I think, where people frankly get away with it, where we don't have criminal prosecutions applied for so-called white-collar crime. And so I think in this case, given, as Rishi Sunak said, this is a day of national scandal, one of the worst in this country's history, where the state was literally injecting poisoned blood into the arms of young men and women, I think that there's a very strong case for this kind of thing to be pursued in the future.
These kids at Trelaw College, Kevin, where was the duty of care? What's happened there? Is that just that the pharmaceutical company that was injecting them with this blood was just able to act with absolute impunity? Because why? Who was not there looking after those kids? Who was not there checking that they were being protected? And has anything changed?
Well, that's an excellent question. I mean, you wonder, these poor children were effectively used to be experimented on. And, when they're at school, there is a duty of care on the teachers, on staff to look after these children. How this was allowed to happen, the families of these children thought that they were being looked after to the best of the school staff's ability, and yet we now know that they were being experimented on effectively and facing a slow, lingering death. Absolutely horrendous, and that's probably one of, the whole inquiry has uncovered thousands of examples of terrible suffering, needless suffering by thousands of people. But I think that one in particular really gets to the heart of the matter. These were young, innocent children who, through no fault of their own, were condemned to death. And really, the families deserve so many answers as to how this happened, and reassurances for the public that this type of thing can never possibly happen again.
And James, so just finally on this, it was brutal, because staff would go around the classroom pointing at the boys saying, "You've got it, you haven't, you've got it, you haven't," referring to a disease called HIV that was ultimately going to kill them. Unbelievable.
Absolutely. It was the callous handling compounding the initial shocking misjudgment. And that is why when you see people like Ken Clarke be so cavalier in their evidence after decades of these kind of stories, it's all the more galling for the victims and their families.
It really is. Right, thank you both so much, Kevin and James Heal from The Spectator there this morning. In a statement, a spokesperson at the Lord Mayor Trelaw College has said the inquiry's report shows the full extent of this horrifying national scandal. We are devastated that some of our former pupils were so tragically affected and hope that the findings provide some solace for them and their families. The report lays bare the systemic failure at the heart of the scandal.
Well, that won't bring much comfort, will it?
It won't bring much comfort. And I don't think anything has changed. As we know, there are a lot of people who've been used as guinea pigs in even recent times. It's nothing to do with infected blood.
When I was reading it, I thought this... God forgive me to even think of Germany, what was going on with experiments the Nazi doctors did on Jewish people. Experimenting on little boys. Let's just pump this stuff into their veins. It might be all right, might not.
Sounds strangely familiar of recent events.
And it killed 75% of them.
Yeah. I'm just going to read out a tweet from our colleague here at GBNews, Mark Dolan, which I think is brilliant. He said, "The infected blood scandal is a profound moment of national shame. Government, the NHS and the civil service failed thousands of tragic victims. Said luckily things have changed and the COVID-19 vaccine rollout was ethical, proportionate and did no harm. Because there are some questions still to be asked, especially with children in that debate as well. So has much changed? I'm not sure it has. I hope it will, and I hope there are lessons to be learned, and I hope people are held to account. Up next.
Rishi Sunak, he's in Austria. He's getting support for his Rwanda deal.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Have government done enough, do you think, to actually help them out?
I think there will be occasions where people have tried to run a venture, whether it be a pub, a restaurant or anything sort of like that, in the hospitality sector, and it hasn't become commercially viable because of costs, because of bad accounting or because of bad business people. That is just a fact of life. That happens in every sector. So there will be pubs that are closing because they've been poorly run. But I do think there will be occasions where people are forced out of the market. So if local councils aren't being able to pass on business rates, for example, maybe central government can do more. It always tries to do more to cut beer duty and things like that to keep pubs going. So I don't think it's necessarily just as plain as what James is saying, is that, you know, bad pubs will just inevitably be falling by the wayside.
The idea that you two gentlemen, you raging capitalists, support the government stepping in to protect pubs seems to be particularly peculiar. If a pub isn't commercially viable, it has to be allowed to fail.
Well, Sadiq Khan, you know, he has a nighttime czar that he pays well over 100 grand.
Yes.
And businesses are going under like you wouldn't believe in London.
She's a real nightmare.
What's your point?
Well, the point is that Labour aren't exactly helping out these businesses, are they? So
I'm saying that pubs should not be protected by the state. I'm all for a pub.
I'm not suggesting that we subsidise pubs.
That has been suggested. That's what James May is railing against. Although I have to say, it's all very well for James May and presumably his very posh gastropub. But if a pub is not fit for purpose, and May makes this point, you know, you've got to have decent, clean loos and a clean pub. And also, realistically, in this day and age, you know, times change. You've got to put on some decent grub as well if you want it to survive. We can't have the government stepping in to save our pubs. And anyway, my understanding over the last 10, 20 years, as a percentage, we haven't lost that many pubs, so they're not going under anytime soon.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people. To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, 9:50.
Earpiece fell out. Sorry.
Right, Rishi Sunak is in Austria. He's held talks with the country's leader about illegal migration.
He's announced an extra 25 million, honestly, to disrupt people smugglers and their operations. We've got an exclusive interview with the Prime Minister, which we're going to be broadcasting very shortly, and he's going to make some very big revelations. But first...
Mark White is here with the latest.
I'm not sure how big the revelations are going to be, but, you know...
The 25 million is nothing.
Don't play it down, Mark.
I mean, how much have we squandered with the French authorities to try to stop the people... to try to crack down on the people smugglers, to try to stop the boats going on the channel in the first place? What does it take for a copper to just puncture the dinghy?
To be fair to the French...
Do we have to be?
They are...
Do we have to be fair?
They are doing that. 500 million, to answer your question, is what we're
a lot of money.
The French over a number of years to enhance the security on the beaches. They've got a very strong, long stretch of coastline that they've got to try to police. The people smugglers are trying to keep one step ahead of them. They've actually been adapting their tactics in recent weeks. We've noticed that now they seem to be pushing out boats much more often, but in smaller numbers. So before you had a surge tactic where you get a dozen boats at least being pushed off from the beaches in the hope that the majority of these boats would get through. Now they seem to be just trying to pick stretches of beach where they think law enforcement are not going to be, go out on days when the weather's not that good and, you know, it takes them a bit by surprise. But you know, that's their tactic for the moment. It'll change again. Trying to stay one step ahead of the people smugglers is an extraordinarily difficult task for the authorities to do. We're getting 25 million more for the NCA.
Don't they know who they are? Don't the French police know who they are? Don't Interpol know who they are? Don't the British police know who they are? It can't be beyond the wit of man to know who they are and to get them.
Well, you would certainly think so, and yes, of course, they do have intelligence as to who the big organised criminal networks are. But having intelligence, knowing who people are, and actually being able to prove that they're linked to a crime, it is difficult. You can't move on individuals necessarily until you have that evidence in place that you can put before the courts, or you're just back to square one again.
I think what's changed recently for me, probably in the last 6 months with this story, is that this felt like a very British problem, illegal migration for such a long time. But there was this letter signed by 15 leaders of EU countries last week, wasn't it? Mainland Europe is feeling this badly now.
Yeah.
That might bring things to a head, which might also help us.
I think that's an excellent point, actually. Europe appear to be wakening up to the need to come up with a solution that's going to act as a proper deterrent. And they are seriously looking at the issue of third countries now, which is going to be interesting for Labour, because Labour has said very explicitly if they get into power, Rwanda is being scrapped. So what are they going to do then? Look for another third safe country?
Bingo.
We're going to go through this whole rigmarole again.
Yeah.
So European countries, a number of them, are actively looking at them. In fact, some, like Italy, have already signed with the likes of Albania.
All right, thank you, Mark. Well, we'll have that interview with the Prime Minister any minute now, but also Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner is going to show you the houses of the future. Before that, the weather.
She knows a lot about homes.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Morning. Here's your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. There's a chance of some heavy, persistent rain, particularly across eastern parts tomorrow, but through today, we're talking about showers. We've already seen some showers developing, especially across parts of England, but these are going to become more widespread, more frequent, and pretty heavy as we go through the day. There's also the risk of some thunder, especially across parts of Northern Ireland and southwest England. Elsewhere, there will be quite a few showers around, also some bright or sunny spells. And in any sunshine, it should feel relatively warm, with temperatures peaking in the mid to high teens, possibly just about getting into the low 20s Celsius. More showers to come as we head towards this evening, and they are going to be pretty heavy for some of us, even across parts of Scotland, though they won't be especially frequent here. We could see some downpours. A decent amount of bright or sunny spells around, though towards eastern parts, holding on to a bit more cloud here. Plenty of showers, though, across parts of Northern Ireland, likely to see some disruption, especially on the roads. Could be a bit of surface water flooding. Also plenty of showers across many parts of England and Wales, and here they could be heavy, possibly even thundery too, so do take care, especially if you're heading on the roads. As we go through overnight Tuesday into Wednesday, we are going to see more showery rain developing, and there's the potential for some more persistent rain to kick in across eastern parts as we go towards dawn on Wednesday as well. Quite a bit of cloud for many of us, so temperatures aren't going to drop a huge amount, but there could be some murkiness for some of us, some mist, some fog patches, a bit of low cloud in some spots. Tomorrow, the big talking point will be the heavy persistent rain. A bit of uncertainty as to how far west this is going to spread, but it is across eastern areas that it's most likely to be pretty wet here. Some heavy persistent rain. Meanwhile, further west, it's looking slightly drier, but some showery outbreaks, some bright or sunny spells though, and temperatures looking similar to today. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the biggest cash prize we've given away to date. An incredible £20,000 that you could use however you like. And because it's totally tax-free, every single penny will be in your bank account to do whatever you like with. £20,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours this summer. Hurry, you've got to be in it to win it. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
down to earth,
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
and most importantly, honest,
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News with Dubes & Co from 6, followed by Farage at 7. At 8, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg addresses the state of the nation. And at 9, join Patrick Christie's Tonight, followed by Headliners at 11. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. This is GB News, Britain's election channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
10 o'clock on Monday, the 21st of May. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
The Prime Minister's in Vienna and he's getting key support from Europe for his Rwanda migrant scheme. He's been speaking exclusively to GB News and we're going to bring you that very soon.
And comprehensive compensation. Ministers will set out the details of a £10 billion package for the victims of the infected blood scandal later today. Here's Rishi Sunak reacting to the inquiry yesterday.
The people and institutions in which we place our trust failed in the most harrowing and devastating way.
The sewage scandal. The Chief Medical Officer for England, Sir Chris Whitty, says cleaning up our water is a public health priority as well as an environmental one. Oh, stating it flipping obvious. Honestly.
And boot camp for the jobless. Out-of-work Britons will be offered training to plug gaps in the labour market which were filled by overseas workers. I think that is a very good idea.
So do I. How much did we pay the Chief Medical Officer for England to come up with that profound observation? Sir Chris Whitty. Profound observation. He's a man you saw on your TV screen virtually every day during the COVID lockdown. Oh, it's a public health issue and an environment. We never knew it, Sir Chris.
Honestly, we're all outraged about our dirty rivers
Filth.
and seas.
It's
It
a
is
scandal.
not acceptable. We're going to be going live, actually, to a big event in the UK this morning. A celebration, actually, of our rivers and how clean they should be. We're going to be talking to some experts who are down there, hopefully, in the sunshine.
Who'd swim in a river these days? Not me.
I like swimming in rivers. I do. No, seem edge away then. I've not been in one this morning. I wish I had. There's a canal out here. It always takes my eye. I love swimming in rivers, but even if I didn't, I want my kids to go in the sea on holiday, and I want them to be able to swim in clean waters. Let us know your thoughts this morning. gbnews.com/your say. First, though, Tatiana Sanchez.
Thank you. The top stories. Victims of the infected blood scandal will find out today how the government will compensate them when it makes a statement in the House of Commons. The Prime Minister apologised yesterday after the infected blood inquiry published its final report into the scandal, blaming failures on successive governments, the NHS and blood services. Since the 1970s, 30,000 people were infected with HIV and hepatitis through contaminated blood products and transfusions. Around 3,000 have since died. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has pledged to pay victims back as part of a £10 billion package. Shadow Cabinet Minister Nick Thomas-Symonds says yesterday was a profound moment for the country, but that victims should not have gone through what they did.
The fact that it isn't just this awful scandal, we've got the Hillsborough scandal as well, we've got the Windrush scandal, we've got the Post Office Horizon scandal, and how it is that there are people who are protecting their own reputations, protecting the reputation of institutions above the public interest. He talked about a cultural change. There's not a single policy lever to pull to make that possible. That's going to require leadership, and that's what we have to dedicate ourselves to do, not just now, but in the months and years ahead.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has said illegal migration has become truly one of the defining issues of our time. He's in Vienna for talks with the Austrian Chancellor about illegal migration. Rishi Sunak arrived at the Chancellery, greeted by Austria's Karl Nehammer. A red carpet was rolled out to welcome him. 15 EU countries, including Austria, signed a letter calling on the European Commission to tighten migration policy and to look at third country schemes. Their meeting comes as the government promised an extra £25 million for the National Crime Agency to tackle people smuggling gangs. At a press conference this morning, Rishi Sunak said the criminal gangs are growing in strength and business as usual won't solve the problem.
People are losing their lives as they are exploited by these criminal gangs, and it is of course a threat to our stability, to the rule of law, and rightly our citizens are demanding that their leaders, their politicians, tackle it. We have to think creatively. We have to pursue new ideas, new solutions and deterrents, removals to safe third countries like the UK's pioneering Rwanda scheme. And as Carl said, it's increasingly clear that many other countries now agree that that is the approach that is required. Bold, novel, looking at safe country partnerships.
Meanwhile, during a visit to Essex Police's headquarters, the Home Secretary has insisted the government is still determined to stop the boats as migrant channel crossings near 10,000 for the year so far. James Cleverly has said people smugglers have changed the way they operate when he was questioned over why the number of migrants arriving in the UK continues to rise. He blamed Labour, saying the Rwanda scheme has been delayed because of the delaying tactics of the Labour Party. Brits out of work in the UK will be offered places on skills boot camps as part of a government bid to plug gaps in the labour market previously filled by overseas workers. Benefits claimants will be given training for roles in key sectors facing shortages, including hospitality, care, construction and manufacturing. In a speech today, Work and Pensions Secretary Mel Stride is expected to say the UK has relied on foreign labour for far too long, and he is determined to put that right. It comes after the Home Office announced a number of restrictions to cut the number of people entering the country and ahead of official net migration statistics being published this week. Mel Stride told GB News this morning that this is a big opportunity for the domestic workforce.
I've set up a cross-ministerial task force that will be looking at making those kind of changes to the way the labour market works in those sectors to encourage and increase the supply of labour into them. We did that with HGV licences and drivers, if you remember, back in 2021 when we had 33 different changes which even in the short term really freed up labour supply. So those are the kind of things that I'm going to be talking about today.
In other news, the owner of South West Water has revealed it's paying out around £3.5 million in compensation to customers affected by the parasite outbreak in Devon. South West Water increased compensation to £215 for customers, as many were still told to boil their water before drinking it. That's after the contamination of supply by Cryptosporidium. That's a waterborne disease which can cause unpleasant symptoms such as diarrhoea and vomiting. Environment Secretary Steve Barclay told the Commons that the number of cases in the Brixham area could continue to rise due to symptoms taking up to 10 days to emerge. And drivers are being warned over congestion ahead of what's expected to be the busiest May bank holiday weekend on the roads since the start of the COVID pandemic. The RAC has predicted more than 20 million leisure trips by car will be made between Friday and bank holiday Monday. The worst day is likely to be Friday, as the start of the long weekend coincides with the beginning of the half-term for some schools. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Andrew and Bev.
Very good morning. It is 10:08. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearson, Bev Turner. You've been getting in touch at home on gbnews.com/your say. James, who is a member, thank you very much, James, says Rishi, very simple, turn the boats back. Under international maritime law, we are entitled to do it. Why are you still lying to the British public? With about 25 exclamation marks. And Saul has got in touch about this story about Labour offering boot camps, so training boot camps, not the physical type to people who haven't got jobs, but they might need to reskill, let's say. Empty, worthless waste of time, says
It's the
Saul.
Tories actually offering it, not the Labour.
Is it?
It's a Labour.
Is this not a Labour ambition?
It's Mel Stride.
Oh.
Announcing it today.
Make them work or sanction their benefits. Thank you. Britain is filthy. Get the unworkable out with supervised foremen, power washing our city centres, lanes, backcourts, cleaning, fly chipping, etc.
Brilliant.
That I agree with. I am so sick of our dirty pavements.
And they're broken and there's litter everywhere and it's a great idea, but why are they waiting till 5 minutes before a general election to do it?
Exactly. I think that's why I presumed it was a Labour policy.
It's a Tory
It feels like at the moment we've been having this sort of impasse, haven't we, where no one's been telling us what they're going to do, and suddenly there's now like policy.
Labour is saying, oh, this is demonising migrants. No, what we're saying is this country is full up. We're bursting at the seams.
Nothing
We've got
works.
vast numbers of people on benefits who aren't working, who could be working, and this is what the Mel Stride is saying, going to help people to know how to apply for a job, because some people do need help. Problem with basic literacy, because he's saying we've got to mobilise these unemployed people to get them back into work. The thing is, we've got to make sure that it's beneficial for them to work, Bev, rather than staying on benefits, because that's the trouble. Often it is more beneficial to stay on benefits. Ridiculous.
Right, gbnews.com/your say. So, the government will outline its plans today to compensate the victims and families of the infected blood scandal.
In a very chilling section of the inquiry, it found this is just so distressing. Boys at Lord Mayor Treloar College in Hampshire were used as objects for research, guinea pigs, in other words. Only 30 of the 122 pupils with haemophilia at the school in the 70s and 80s are still alive today.
There are calls for Lord Ken Clarke, the former Health Secretary, to lose his peerage. Here he is at the inquiry, not exactly looking contrite.
Why do we have to go in such meticulous detail through who said what when, and when did he change his mind? And I do seem to have changed my mind, yes. It didn't make any difference, did it?
I think
what happened on the ground?
Not for me to answer questions.
Well, it is. What's the relevance of all this? What difference did it make on the ground?
So Ken Clarke was Health Minister in 1983 when he denied any link between blood and the growing problem of HIV/AIDS. If you got HIV, which turned to AIDS in the 1980s, it was a death sentence. And that was the problem with this blood. Much of the blood that was imported from America came from prisons, gay bars, sex workers. It had HIV in it. And he denied there was any link.
Joining us now is the Chair of Haemophilia Scotland, Bill Wright. Good morning, Bill. I'm sure it's been an emotional week for you in some regards. There's a huge amount of information to take in and a huge amount of exasperation, actually, and disbelief about the things that we've heard coming out of this inquiry. Can you just explain to us how this happened in the first place as the Chair of Haemophilia Scotland? How was infected blood able to be distributed so willingly?
Well, as has finally been reported in the inquiry, there were major shortcomings throughout the situation. There was a lack of regulation in terms of the way that blood was processed for those people who had blood transfusions. basically the inquiry indicates that some doctors were using blood fast and loose when there was evidence going right back to the 1940s that blood, taking 1 pint of blood from one person and giving to another person involved the potential to carry viruses such as hepatitis and of course the later virus HIV. I myself was infected with hepatitis C in 1986. And so there were problems at all levels, because for those people who had haemophilia, the bleeding disorder, where they have difficulty actually making their blood clot, they gave these blood concentrates called factor 8 and factor 9 in order to stop them bleeding. But those concentrates were made up from blood donors from literally thousands of people. And it just needed one of those donors to carry a virus for a haemophiliac to be infected with that virus.
When do you think, Bill, in honesty, that that people in authority, people distributing the blood, were aware there could be a problem? Because I know they were screening for HIV from 1986, but they weren't screening for hepatitis, I understand, until 1991.
Well, there were scientists who, frankly, were signalling back in the 1940s, then the 50s, then the 60s, that hepatologists, not hematologists, people who experts on viruses rather than on blood, who were saying that there was the danger that blood could be carried. And the various official committees and so on and so forth, they chose to frankly ignore a lot of that advice. And it actually turned out that the analogy I would draw here is that there was smoke coming out of a building. But when the fire brigade turned up, they said, well, this isn't actually a real fire yet. So let's just see what happens. And we can actually, we can research on it and see, watch closely what happens. And then if the building burns down with a child in it, then obviously that's bad news. So there was this culture amongst the medical profession where, rather than any evidence where there was a potential risk, and they chose to act in it, they waited until they said, well, no, we need convincing proof that blood's actually the cause of the virus, of these viruses. In other words, they didn't adopt a precautionary approach.
And the Haemophilia Society, Bill, was the first to say Ken Clarke should not even get his peerage until the public inquiry into infected blood had reported. Now, Ken Clarke got his peerage. We saw his cavalier, arrogant response in that public inquiry. Is your view now that actually there should at least be a debate about whether he should keep that peerage, because he can, of course, in certain circumstances, it can be stripped from him?
I think there may well be a strong case for that. And what you're actually talking about there is justice. I've just had a debate with colleagues in another broadcasting forum about whether, for example, criminal prosecutions might take place. I think there are two ways of looking at justice. There's from the perspective of the perpetrator, the guilty parties, but also there's from the perspective of the victims here. And of course, those of us that have been infected would be, the survivors, would be seen as the victims. And we're about to hear this afternoon from the government about how they might actually compensate for that. I think certainly Kenneth Clarke's reputation has been completely shredded in this report that appeared yesterday, along with other ministers, along with civil servants, and along with doctors. Whether we need to go beyond that may well cause a lot of angst, and we need to beware of the law of unintended consequences, because if we weren't successful in removing Kenneth Clarke from the House of Lords, then that may well cause further stress, further angst, further anguish and anger. And I think we've now reached a point where, frankly, perhaps we really need to get on with our lives in this community. And, what's left of our lives. I mean, I was infected 38 years ago, personally, with hepatitis C. I then went on to develop, because of that, liver cirrhosis, and I've recently been diagnosed with liver cancer. So I was unfortunately unable to be in London yesterday to hear the report being delivered. But the report came as no surprise. It wasn't a shock, because we'd watched the evidence during the course of the inquiry. We'd seen Kenneth Clarke, and the offensive manner in which he behaved during that inquiry, and the disrespect that he paid to Sir Brian and his legal team. So none of that came as a surprise. What was a surprise was, frankly, the judgment that Sir Brian placed in all of this after he assembled all the evidence together.
OK, thank you so much. We wish you all the best.
Yeah.
Bill, that's the chair of the Haemophilia Association Scotland. Bill Wright, cheers.
Very gracious when you consider. I mean, the easiness to just be bitter.
I know. It's quite touching, isn't it? It's similar with the post office scandal. I think when something's been going on for so long, maybe you can't be consumed by the anger and the hate, and actually you just...
He's channeling it into trying to get things done.
Let's tell you what the Lord Mayor of Trelaw College said. We are devastated that some of our former pupils were so tragically affected.
They died.
The findings provide some solace for them and their families. The report lays bare the systemic failure at the heart of the scandal.
Tragically affected, says the statement. No, they died.
Yeah, and that some of them died, the majority of them died. Right, still to come, do you know what D-Day is? Well, apparently more than half of young people don't. Generation Z, of course, yet again. You're going to go, aren't you, next week on D-Day?
Going to be here for GB News and on the beaches in France. I'm looking forward to it. It'll be very moving, very proud. 80th anniversary, of course, of D-Day, because some of us know what it is and why it's important.
Don't go anywhere. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Have government done enough, do you think, to actually help them out?
I think there will be occasions where people have tried to run a venture, whether it be a pub, a restaurant or anything sort of like that, in the hospitality sector, and it hasn't become commercially viable because of costs, because of bad accounting or because of bad business people. That is just a fact of life. That happens in every sector. So there will be pubs that are closing because they've been poorly run. But I do think there will be occasions where people are forced out of the market. So if local councils aren't being able to pass on business rates, for example, maybe central government can do more. It always tries to do more to cut beer duty and things like that to keep pubs going. So I don't think it's necessarily just as plain as what James is saying, is that, you know, bad pubs will just inevitably be falling by the wayside.
The idea that you two gentlemen, you raging capitalists, support the government stepping in to protect pubs seems to be particularly peculiar. If a pub isn't commercially viable, it has to be allowed to fail.
Well, Sadiq Khan, you know, he has a nighttime czar that he pays well over 100 grand.
Yes.
And businesses are going under like you wouldn't believe in London.
She's a real nightmare.
What's your point?
Well, the point is that Labour aren't exactly helping out these businesses, are they? So
I'm saying that pubs should not be protected by the state. I'm all for a pub.
Well, I'm not suggesting that we subsidise pubs.
Well, that has been suggested. That's what James May is railing against. Although I have to say, it's all very well for James May and presumably his very posh gastropub. But if a pub is not fit for purpose, and May makes this point, you know, you've got to have decent, clean loos and a clean pub. And also, realistically, in this day and age, you know, times change, you've got to put on some decent grub as well if you want it to survive. We can't have the government stepping in to save our pubs. And anyway, my understanding over the last 10, 20 years, as a percentage, we haven't lost that many pubs, so they're not going under anytime soon.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
10:22, you're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
We are joined in the studio by GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and former Lib Dem MP Luciana Berger.
Labour MP.
I was going to say, I was just going to say, you were Lib Dem for a little while.
Yeah.
Somebody got that off Wikipedia wrong.
Yeah.
You were Labour, and then you were temporarily with the Lib Dems, and you are now back in the Labour Party.
I am, yeah.
You left the Labour Party, Luciana, over the appalling anti-Semitism during Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. Michael Gove, the Community Secretary, is making a speech this morning where he's saying these marches, particularly in London, they're becoming a vehicle for hatred, and the organisers have to do more to stop the anti-Semitism, the cries for intifada. What's your view?
Well, I think we have to be very, very careful that we don't paint every single protester in that vein. And certainly most people are peace-loving and exercising their right to protest as we have in this country. Separately, we have a challenge in a very serious situation. And I was watching some of the videos from the protests that took place over the weekend of people that are not following the rules. We've got people that have face coverings when they're not supposed to have face coverings. And I saw footage from the weekend of people calling for intifada in this country, which is obviously very, very serious and needs to be addressed.
Do you, as a Jewish person, would you feel safe walking in central London in the area of the marches? You saw what happened to Gideon Falter a few weeks ago, part of the the campaign against anti-Semitism. He was threatened with arrest. You look very Jewish, sir.
Yeah, and I saw that video. I mean, I choose not to travel into those areas on the weekend.
Because of that?
But because I'm recognisable and identifiable as a member of the Jewish community. That's not the case for everyone, but that's the choice that I make.
That's terrible.
Can you believe when you stop and think about what that means as a British citizen in 2024, how do you square that with any sort of clamp down on those sorts of protests whilst also maintaining our right to protest?
Well, I think it answers the question that you asked at the start, and that's about making sure that everything can and should be done to hold people to account that do break the rules. And the fact that we continue to see on a weekly basis footage, we see both video and photographs of people that are holding placards that do break the rules, have very clearly anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish hatred written on them. The fact that we're seeing people that are chanting things, again, that break the rules, that's where we need to see the action taken. So our streets are safe for people that wish to walk amongst them.
Nigel, it is a shameful state of affairs, isn't it? That Jewish people will feel unwilling, like Luciana, who's very high profile, to go into our great capital city because of what they may experience.
Of course it is. I mean, obviously Luciana is recognisable in a way that other people may not be, and this is where the police must take action. I mean, certainly, if Gove is turning around and saying that the organisers must try and police their own demonstration properly, that's right too. There should be no anti-Semitism on these marches. There should be no hate speech. The chanting we talked about before. It depends what chants are actually being made, but really it comes down to it's down to the police to make sure these demonstrations don't break the law. They are arresting people. Several hundred people have already been arrested on these demonstrations. That is right. But if that people are still getting through, you're going to need more police out there to make more arrests.
Yeah. I mean, Michael Gove is going to be talking this morning. He's going to say that the organisers of these marches could do everything in their power to stop them, and they don't. To stop that, he's talking about promoting hate. The marches have been overwhelmingly peaceful, of course, but somebody was arrested at the weekend for carrying a coffin with offensive language on it. How do you see this panning out, Luciana? If you can get out your crystal ball, because whilst this is raging in the Middle East, we are going to see this in this country every single weekend. That could be years.
And we've seen it at different moments in our history, and we certainly saw it, between under the last government as well, and then it was the next thing. So I think in the here and now, the most important thing is about ensuring that we do have laws in this country and that they are used to hold people to account when they break them. And that's certainly, I think, the gap at the moment. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball and I don't know what will happen into the future, but certainly now, at this moment, just in the last few days, we have seen that footage of what's happened on our streets, and that's why more action needs to be taken. And we do have laws. We do have laws which mean that people cannot or should be doing this, and therefore people should be held to account.
We're just going to get a clip because this is Michael Gove, the Community Secretary, speaking now. We might just catch a bit of what he's saying.
Since then,
the shadow has only spread, the hate grown. We've seen an explosion in anti-Semitism. The charity charged with recording anti-Semitic incidents, the Community Security Trust, recorded 4,103 incidents in 2023. As we've heard, that was an increase of 147% on the previous year, which was itself a record high. Of those figures, 2,699 incidents occurred after October the 7th. That is, more anti-Semitic incidents occurred between October the 7th and December the 31st, 2023, than in any previous 12-month period. And every day brings fresh examples. The chaplain driven off campus at Leeds University because he was Jewish. The visitor to a mosque promoting interfaith dialogue told he was not welcome because he was Jewish. The family who found their baby's passport defaced because they were Jewish. The stand-up comic who was told by a BBC comedy star that she would be killed and her family would be grieving for her in the cemetery because she was Jewish. The renovator of a dilapidated building threatened with a machete and told he should leave the, quotes, Jew building he was working in because he was Jewish. The reporter told not to cover an event because her eyes looked Jewish. And inseparable from these incidents are the increasingly strident, visible, and lurid demonstrations of anti-Semitism on our streets during protest marches. Swastikas, Hamas banners, depictions of Jews as exploiters, devils, child killers. It's incessant. We saw it again only this weekend. The imagery of Der Stürmer paraded past the gates of Downing Street. Now, of course, I know that many of those on these marches are compassionate people, driven by a desire for peace and an end to suffering. But they're side by side with those who are promoting hate. The organizers of these marches could do everything in their power to stop that. But many, the majority, don't. And we know now that it is genuinely dangerous for people to be openly, clearly, proudly Jewish near these marches. At a time when we're all encouraged to be our whole authentic selves, to celebrate our identity, to be out and proud, there is only one group told that they, and they alone, can only be tolerated on terms set by others, Jews. The organizers of the marches say that there are Jewish people on their demonstrations, but they are only safe if they deny what is dear to so many Jewish people, the safety of people in Israel. If they are to be accepted on these marches, then they must knuckle under, accept the calls to globalize the Intifada or to end the Zionist entity. They have to obey the rules laid down by others, those march organizers, who reserve the right to tell Jews both where they should live in the world and how they should live on our streets. It is a classic anti-Semitic trope to set the terms on which Jews will be accepted.
Michael Gove, the Community Secretary. Luciana, there's him speaking. How do you react to what he's saying?
Well, I mean, he's setting out the real-life experience of too many Jewish people across this country, where we have seen this explosion, this massive increase in anti-Jewish attacks, anti-Jewish rhetoric. Some of it's online, some of it's in person. And we're seeing this replicated not just in our country, but in other Western countries at this time as well. And some of the troll comments, we didn't hear them at that moment, is that Michael Gove in this speech is going to say that it's anti-Jewish hatred is the canary in the coal mine, because what starts with anti-Semitism doesn't end with anti-Semitism, and we have a responsibility to all of our society and all of our country to stamp it out, because it doesn't just stop and start with anti-Jewish hatred.
Is it the worst you've ever known it?
Yes.
Luciana? Really?
Absolutely, yeah. Certainly in my experience, in my 43 years, but yeah.
Do you have, just before we let you go for break, I mean, do you have confidence that these organisers are going to heed what he's saying? Because I saw it on Saturday, I saw no attempt to crack down on these terrible people with their placards from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free, an anti-Semitic trigger. I heard people saying hateful things about Jewish people. It was horrible.
So in this speech, we know that Michael Gove is talking about that element as well as many other things. Let's not just say it's just about those demonstrations. And as I said at the start, people have the right to demonstrate, but it's when they cross the line that people need to be held to account. And absolutely, much more needs to be done to tackle those people that emit anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish hatred. But it doesn't just stop and start with those demonstrations either, because many of the examples I've heard from people in the Jewish community across the United Kingdom have experienced it in their workplaces, in their places of education, online. And so we need to be looking at this in the round, not just in that specific area.
OK. Right, thank you both. I'm afraid it was cut short because we listened to Michael Gove, but you will be back with us in about an hour or so. First, the very latest news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Beth, thank you and good morning. The top stories this hour. Victims of the infected blood scandal will find out today how the government will compensate them when it makes a statement in the House of Commons. The Prime Minister apologised yesterday after the infected blood inquiry published its final report into the scandal, blaming failures on successive governments, the NHS and blood services. Since the 1970s, 30,000 people were infected with HIV and hepatitis through contaminated blood products and transfusions. Around 3,000 have since died. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has pledged to pay victims back as part of a £10 billion package. The Prime Minister says illegal migration has become truly one of the defining issues of our time as he visits Vienna for talks with the Austrian Chancellor about the issue. A red carpet was rolled out as Rishi Sunak was greeted by Austria's Karl Nehammer. The Prime Minister has said the two are deepening cooperation on illegal migration and agreed that schemes like the UK's Rwanda plan are needed to tackle the issue in Europe. Their meeting comes as the government promised an extra £25 million for the National Crime Agency to tackle people smuggling gangs. Meanwhile, during a visit to Essex Police's headquarters, the Home Secretary insisted the government is still determined to stop the boats, as migrant channel crossings near 10,000 for the year so far. James Cleverly has said people smugglers have changed the way they operate when he was questioned over why the number of migrants arriving in the UK continues to rise. And a woman has died after a dog attack in a house in East London, with police seizing 2 XL bullies from the property. The Metropolitan Police says the victim was in her 50s and the incident happened yesterday afternoon. Officers say she was pronounced dead at the scene and the 2 registered dogs were seized after being contained in a room. From February the 1st this year, it became a criminal offence to own the XL bully breed in England and Wales without an exemption certificate. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2717 and €1.1699. The price of gold is £1,901 and 63 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 8,390 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Up next, with the nation's rivers riddled with pollution, what can we do about it? We're going to be joined by speakers at the UK River Summit. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good morning, I'm Russell Holding. In East Ayrshire, the A76 is closed each way between Auchinleck and Catrin after an accident. In Dumfries and Galloway, the A75 is closed at Glenluce after an accident causing queues. On the M1 in Nottinghamshire, 2 lanes are closed southbound, with someone's broken down between junctions 26 and 25 near Nottingham, causing queues. On the M42 in Warwickshire, there's a lane closed southbound after an accident between junctions 7 and 6 from the M6 to the A45, with queues towards there. And on the M6 in Warwickshire, there are 2 lanes closed southbound where a lorry caught fire between junctions 4 and 3 from the M42 to Coventry, taking 40 minutes in the queues towards there. In Monmouthshire, the A4042 is closed at Llanover after an accident. In Torvine, the A4043 is closed at Blenarvan after an accident. And on the M4 in Berkshire, 2 lanes are closed eastbound where a lorry caught fire between the Membry services and junction 14 at Hungerford, causing queues. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Emma, let's start, shall we, with Prince William confirming on the Isles of Scilly yesterday that Kate is doing well. I thought it was a very brave lady to say, I'm not allowed to ask how the Princess of Wales is, and I thought, well, we're not, so good for you.
Yeah. One of the hospitals he visited on the Isles of Scilly, an administrator, a hospital administrator, asked him how Kate was doing, and he said, she's doing well, thanks.
Until we hear official word from the palace, then we're just going to have to rely on little snippets like this.
It does seem to be serious. So,
it does.
Again, we wish her
What's
very
quite telling as well, I went through some of the social media comments on this, and people that live on the Isle of Scilly were just saying how close they got, how wonderful it was. He's supporting local businesses. And that pasty shop will now be like treasured, you know, forever. People forever go there.
On the Quay. It sounds great. It's called On the Quay.
Compare and contrast with this I feel at home in Nigeria vibe that Meghan's putting out. Two very, very different takes on how to be a royal.
Do they want to be royals or do they not? Because they seem to want sort of half the trappings but without all the kind of responsibilities.
These two brothers, who obviously went through a lot growing up, obviously can't stand the sight of each other right now, and it's just really sad.
Well, it goes beyond the brothers. I mean, we are told from some of the papers this morning that the King didn't have time in his schedule to see his son because he was actually meeting David Beckham for a private meeting.
Well, who would you choose?
All about priorities.
I mean, I know I
It's all about priorities.
But, you know, you surely, I mean, you could just pop in as well. I reckon that Harry and Bex are pals, probably. So what's gone on there, and will they ever be able to repair things?
And they really were so close. I mean, when you compare the Buckingham Palace garden party, a couple of miles down the road, literally Harry was at Westminster or wherever it was. It wasn't far. And it absolutely would have been possible for him
3 miles apart, and yet absolutely worlds apart in terms of their emotional state.
Now, a dedicated police task force is being set up to bring down grooming gangs, and it's made hundreds of arrests in its first year.
That's right. In the last 12 months, the crack team of expert investigators and analysts have helped police arrest over 550 suspects and protect over 4,000 victims.
Well, joining us now is Chris Phillips, a former senior police officer. Chris, this is progress, and it's good news on the face of it. A special, dedicated team. Do they have to have expertise in grooming gangs, or are they learning on the job? Because they seem to be doing pretty well.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both, actually, Andrew. Of course, you learn from mistakes that have been made in the past. You also learn from experience. What it does show is that if you put enough officers onto a situation, onto a crime, you can solve it. And the big issue, I think, is lack of experience in policing and also lack of capability because people are just leaving.
It's all very well making hundreds of arrests, Chris, but I'd like to know how many of them are going to end up behind bars.
We'd all like to know that, Bev, and that's something that the criminal justice system needs to get his head round, because as you've probably read recently, the courts have been prevented from sending anyone to prison because the prisons are full. So, listen, the whole criminal justice system is shot. The police can only do their part of the job, bringing the cases. It's then up to the CPS and the courts to decide what to do with them. I think what this has shown is if you take money away from policing, as an example, generally, you will not have police either on the streets or dealing with these sorts of crimes. And when you do put the resources in, you get these kind of results.
These grooming gangs, Chris, just remind people, who are they targeting, these grooming gangs? Are they young girls always?
Generally young girls, and of course in our inner cities, and we all know the cities that have been mentioned and the particular issues they've got in those cities. I think this is something of a new kind of an offence for police to have to deal with. In particular, much of it is done online, and I think you have to have those skill levels around dealing with the online stuff as well as the on-the-ground stuff. And that's obviously where these police officers have concentrated.
The famous grooming gangs, of course, were predominantly in the last few years been up north, Rochdale, Rotherham, predominantly Pakistani male communities that were able to protect each other from the law, actually. And part of the reason, of course, we've seen, Chris, in this, is that there was a fear of police officers of being accused of targeting, of racial profiling, or indeed being racist. So can we conclude that that fear has now somewhat abated?
No, I don't think that fear's abated at all. I think everyone's tippy-toeing around the whole Islamic crime situation, aren't they? I mean, we know that. It's just that these police officers have been given a particular task to do, and they're finding a very professional way through it. I think this is a problem for society. We're all scared of being called racist, I think, and police are really worried about having the finger pointed at them.
And also, Chris, it's great that this police unit is doing this great job, but we need as well community leaders in these communities. We think of some of the Pakistani gangs that Bev's referred to speak out and to almost try and deal with it from within their own community.
Yes, for everyone to recognise when crime's happening and to deal with it. And certain communities have certain crime types. And this, unfortunately, is an issue that has been predominantly around the Pakistani young men, or not even young men, sort of middle-aged men. It's a real problem. And I think until we all grow a pair, really, and start dealing with the problems that we have in our cities, then we won't be able to solve the problems of crime in our cities.
OK, Chris, great to see you, former police officer Chris Phillips there. We just sort of did a good news story about police officers catching people who needed to be caught. We just have a moment of reflection.
And we should remind ourselves, look, the police do a great job most of the time, but often we talk about the police when things go horribly wrong. Yeah. And let's not forget how the police walked into that guy who was on the rampage in London just a few weeks ago, and they tackled that man with a sword, and they didn't even have a taser.
Well, it sounds like what's happened there. They've put funding, they've put resources, they've put manpower behind the issue, and guess what? Stop the press, it works. It's
intelligence-led policing, which is why you need to have intelligence-led stop and search, because that will stop these young men going out with knives.
Yeah. Right, keep your messages coming in. gbnews.com/your say. But up next, what on earth can we do to clean up our rivers and waterways?
Well, stop the water companies polluting them.
We feel really strongly about this, and we know that a lot of you at home do as well. We're going to be talking to an expert down the line who is enjoying the UK River Summit. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Morning. Here's your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. There's a chance of some heavy, persistent rain, particularly across eastern parts tomorrow, but through today, we're talking about showers. We've already seen some showers developing, especially across parts of England, but these are going to become more widespread, more frequent, and pretty heavy as we go through the day. There's also the risk of some thunder, especially across parts of Northern Ireland and southwest England. Elsewhere, there will be quite a few showers around, also some bright or sunny spells. And in any sunshine, it should feel relatively warm, with temperatures peaking in the mid to high teens, possibly just about getting into the low 20s Celsius. More showers to come as we head towards this evening, and they are going to be pretty heavy for some of us, even across parts of Scotland, though they won't be especially frequent here. We could see some downpours. A decent amount of bright or sunny spells around, though towards eastern parts, holding on to a bit more cloud here. Plenty of showers, though, across parts of Northern Ireland, likely to see some disruption, especially on the roads. Could be a bit of surface water flooding. Also plenty of showers across many parts of England and Wales, and here they could be heavy, possibly even thundery too, so do take care, especially if you're heading on the roads. As we go through overnight Tuesday into Wednesday, we are going to see more showery rain developing, and there's the potential for some more persistent rain to kick in across eastern parts as we go towards dawn on Wednesday as well. Quite a bit of cloud for many of us, so temperatures aren't going to drop a huge amount, but there could be some murkiness for some of us, some mist, some fog patches, a bit of low cloud in some spots. Tomorrow, the big talking point will be the heavy persistent rain. A bit of uncertainty as to how far west this is going to spread, but it is across eastern areas that it's most likely to be pretty wet here. Some heavy persistent rain. Meanwhile, further west, it's looking slightly drier, but some showery outbreaks, some bright or sunny spells though, and temperatures looking similar to today. Bye-bye.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, we've got some important breaking news here. Regulations which lowered the threshold for police intervening in protests are unlawful, according to the High Court, an illegal action brought by the civil liberties group Liberty against the Home Office.
We'll have more on that later in the show. It's just broken.
Who governs this country? Does the government govern the country or do the courts? I think we know.
Yeah, but you know I'm a fan of civil liberties. I like the fact that we have to be able to protest. We need people like Liberty pushing back against increasingly authoritarian governments. But we don't know the detail of it. It's only just broken, so we will let you know. Right, UK River Summit today. It's held on the banks of the River Wandle in South London. Environmental speakers and experts have come together to discuss the state of our rivers and what we can do about it.
Joining us now is the organiser, Claire Zamboni. Claire, our rivers are in a bad place, not least because the water companies are dumping so much sewage into them. Isn't that the case?
That is absolutely the case. There are so many pollutants, so many threats to our rivers, and that's why we created the event today, to bring everyone together to talk about solutions and also learn about some of the different issues around the river, from sewage, from road runoff, from agriculture. So, yeah, here we are at Morden Hall on the River Wandle.
So what kind of event is it today, Claire? Who have you got speaking there? What sort of issues are you going to be covering?
We have got a huge range. So we've got some really hard-hitting panels chaired by some well-known people in the environmental space. We've got celebrities like Jim Murray, who's a huge supporter of clean rivers, Fergal Sharkey. We have the CEO of the Environment Agency. We have regulators here. We've actually got a cross-party panel where we have the Green Party, the Liberal Democrats and Labour talking about possible solutions. And one of the things I think everyone can agree on here is that we really do need cross-party collaboration to actually make our rivers healthy.
How urgent is this problem, Claire?
It's very urgent. I've actually got two experts in here with me now who can probably tell you a little bit more about the facts and figures, but we are literally sitting on the face of a precipice right now.
Would you say to people who Bev like swimming in rivers, would you say to people don't?
That's not really my area. I'm the organiser of the event. I have an overview. But I think if you look at the facts and figures that are printed in the newspapers, they are pretty atrocious. I personally wouldn't swim in a river in the UK. And also, you've got the very worrying fact about the fish life, the biodiversity, what's happening underneath, because being able to swim is just one element. You know, we're actually destroying the wildlife on our rivers.
What kind of issues are there in terms of that wildlife, Claire? Is it about a huge reduction in the number of fish, for instance?
Huge reduction in the number of fish. There was an announcement actually made today about the fish kills. I think they've risen by something like 500% in the last year or so. I mean, it is extraordinary. We've got, you know, loss of biodiversity, loss of insect life, invertebrate life. I mean, it is just being decimated right now.
OK. Well, we wish you the best of luck with it, with your summit today at the River Wandle in South London. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. The organiser there, Claire Zamboni of the UK River Summit.
Will you still swim in a river?
Yeah, I will. I don't swallow it. Try not to.
You'd have to have something on your nose, something in your mouth. I mean,
I'm quite good at swimming without swallowing water, though. It's not that difficult. But it's more... You do have to be a bit careful, though, because especially even if you've got cuts on your arm or anything, some of the bacteria and the germs that you can get in river water can be really bad for you. It's just awful. It's an absolute stain on this country, the state of our water supply, while the water companies make billions of pounds worth of profit.
And only last week, South West Water, people couldn't drink the water in the whole of the region. They're getting a couple of £100 compensation, aren't they?
Yeah. Shall we go and listen to Michael Gove? The Community Secretary is still making a speech on anti-Semitism in this country. Here he is.
In this country. We must say to every Jewish citizen in this country, your safety is the best guarantee of our security. Your freedom to live as you choose is the only way that we can be certain we remain a land of liberty. Your future is our future. We said never again, and that is a promise we will never, ever disavow. Thank you. Thank you again for coming, and of course, if people would like to ask me questions or indeed put points, please feel free. And if anyone would like to, please put their hand up and identify yourself if you're speaking on behalf of a media organisation or a community group. Or...
That was Michael Gove there raising awareness in the UK of anti-Semitism, but the vast majority of it, of course, coming from the Muslim community because of events in the Middle East.
Yep, since Gaza, and we heard Luciana Berger speaking just a moment ago. She's going to be back with us in the studio a little later. Now, she left the Labour Party over the extraordinary anti-Semitism which was not stamped out by Jeremy Corbyn. The Equalities and Human Rights Commission made a devastating landmark report about anti-Semitism on his watch. She's saying now, in her lifetime, she's in her early 40s, she's never known it so bad. And that is terrible.
Let's see what you've been saying at home. Livy has just said there's no cross-party needed. Tell the water companies no more effluent, she doesn't use that word, in our rivers, or we will take your companies off you and send you to prison. Sometimes wish we could do that, actually. And Livy says, I couldn't swim in someone's poo even if I had my mouth closed. But,
well, I know what she means.
I know. And Jonathan says, sometimes you do say sentences on this programme that you don't think you're going to come out. Jonathan says, the rivers will clean themselves, but we've got to stop dumping poop in them. I do not think it's rocket science, but I bet it costs the taxpayer a lot of money. And Nigel, I'll post this again, he says, renationalising the water companies. I worked for the Environment Agency before it was privatised. I worked on the land drainage side of the company. He goes on to say the company was self-regulatory. It took itself to court. Oh, it's a very long message. I will read it while we take the weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Morning. Here's your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. There's a chance of some heavy, persistent rain, particularly across the eastern parts tomorrow, but through today, we're talking about showers. We've already seen some showers developing, especially across parts of England, but these are going to become more widespread, more frequent, and pretty heavy as we go through the day. There's also the risk of some thunder, especially across parts of Northern Ireland and southwest England. Elsewhere, there will be quite a few showers around, also some bright or sunny spells. And in any sunshine, it should feel relatively warm, with temperatures peaking in the mid to high teens, possibly just about getting into the low 20s Celsius. More showers to come as we head towards this evening, and they are going to be pretty heavy for some of us, even across parts of Scotland, though they won't be especially frequent here. We could see some downpours. A decent amount of bright or sunny spells around, though towards eastern parts, holding on to a bit more cloud here. Plenty of showers, though, across parts of Northern Ireland, likely to see some disruption, especially on the roads. Could be a bit of surface water flooding. Also plenty of showers across many parts of England and Wales, and here they could be heavy, possibly even thundery too, so do take care, especially if you're heading on the roads. As we go through overnight Tuesday into Wednesday, we are going to see more showery rain developing, and there's the potential for some more persistent rain to kick in across eastern parts as we go towards dawn on Wednesday as well. Quite a bit of cloud for many of us, so temperatures aren't going to drop a huge amount, but there could be some murkiness for some of us, some mist, some fog patches, a bit of low cloud in some spots. Tomorrow, the big talking point will be the heavy persistent rain. A bit of uncertainty as to how far west this is going to spread, but it is across eastern areas that it's most likely to be pretty wet here. Some heavy persistent rain. Meanwhile, further west, it's looking slightly drier, but some showery outbreaks. Some bright or sunny spells, though, and temperatures looking similar to today. Bye-bye.
that warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The next Great British Giveaway winner could be you, with a massive £20,000 in tax-free cash to be won. Imagine how you'd react getting that winning call from us.
Oh my God, are you joking? Not a wine, what is it? I never won a penny in my life. I don't know what to say. Do you know what? I've never won anything like this in my life. Oh my God. Oh God. Oh, it shocks me. This is amazing.
For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people. To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
11 a.m. on Tuesday, the 21st of May. This is Britain's News on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Thanks for joining us this morning. So, comprehensive compensation. Ministers will finally set out the details of a £10 billion package for victims of the infected blood scandal later.
And we're going to be joined by Angela Newcombe, whose own son Neil died from the infected blood when he was just 22.
And protest laws are unlawful. The High Court rules the government unlawfully gave police wider powers to impose conditions on protests which cause more than minor disruption to the public. Our Home and Security editor will break this ruling down for us.
XL bully dogs, here we go again. They've killed their owner. A woman in her 50s has been mauled to death by her own dogs at her home in East London. The 2 dogs had been registered and they've now been seized.
And boot camp for the jobless. Out-of-work Britons will be offered training to plug gaps in the labour market which were filled by overseas workers. Is that a good idea?
And my book launch for Finding Margaret took place last night and I was delighted by the turnout. There we are, Beverly Turner and the other great woman, Dame Joan Collins.
Get involved this morning, gbnews.com/your say. We are reading your messages and we'll be reading them to you in just a moment. First, though, Tatiana.
Bev, thank you. The top stories from the GB Newsroom. Victims of the infected blood scandal will find out today how the government will compensate them when it makes a statement in the House of Commons. The Prime Minister apologised yesterday after the infected blood inquiry published its final report into the scandal, blaming failures on successive governments, the NHS and blood services. Since the 1970s, 30,000 people were infected with HIV and hepatitis through contaminated blood products and transfusions. Around 3,000 have since died. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has pledged to pay victims back as part of a £10 billion package. Shadow Cabinet Minister Nick Thomas-Symonds says yesterday was a profound moment for the country, but victims should not have gone through what they did.
The fact that it isn't just this awful scandal, we've got the Hillsborough scandal as well, we've got the Windrush scandal, we've got the Post Office Horizon scandal, and how it is that there are people who are protecting their own reputations, protecting the reputation of institutions above the public interest. He talked about a cultural change. There's not a single policy lever to pull to make that possible. That's going to require leadership, and that's what we have to dedicate ourselves to do, not just now, but in the months and years ahead.
The Prime Minister says illegal migration has become truly one of the defining issues of our time as he visits Vienna for talks with the Austrian Chancellor about the issue. A red carpet was rolled out as Rishi Sunak was greeted by Austria's Karl Nehammer. The Prime Minister has said the two are deepening cooperation on illegal migration and agreed that schemes like the UK's Rwanda plan are needed to tackle the issue in Europe. Their meeting comes as the government promised an extra £25 million for the National Crime Agency to tackle people smuggling gangs. At a press conference this morning, Rishi Sunak said the criminal gangs are growing in strength and business as usual will not solve the problem.
People are losing their lives as they are exploited by these criminal gangs, and it is of course a threat to our stability, to the rule of law, and rightly our citizens are demanding that their leaders, their politicians, tackle it. We have to think creatively. We have to pursue new ideas, new solutions and deterrents, removals to safe third countries like the UK's pioneering Rwanda scheme. And as Carl said, it's increasingly clear that many other countries now agree that that is the approach that is required. Bold, novel, looking at safe country partnerships.
Meanwhile, during a visit to Essex Police's headquarters, the Home Secretary has insisted the government is still determined to stop the boats as migrant channel crossings near 10,000 for the year so far. James Cleverly has said people smugglers have changed the way they operate when he was questioned over why the number of migrants arriving in the UK continues to rise. He blamed Labour, saying the Rwanda scheme has been delayed because of the delaying tactics of the Labour Party. And as you've just heard, the High Court has ruled that the regulations which lowered the threshold for police intervening in protests were unlawful. Civil liberties group Liberty brought legal action against the Home Office over protest regulations last year. The government measures lowered the threshold for what it considered serious disruption to community life. They also allowed police officers to take into account any relevant cumulative disruption of repeated protests. Well, in today's ruling, two judges ruled for the group, finding the Home Office acted outside of its powers. A woman has died after a dog attack in a house in East London, with police seizing 2 XL bullies from the property. The Metropolitan Police says the victim was in her 50s and the incident happened yesterday afternoon. Officers say she was pronounced dead at the scene and the 2 registered dogs were seized after being contained in a room. From the 1st of February this year, it became a criminal offence to own the XL bully breed in England and Wales without an exemption certificate. And Brits out of work in the UK will be offered places on skills boot camps as part of a government bid to plug gaps in the labour market previously filled by overseas workers. Benefits claimants will be given training for roles in key sectors facing shortages, including hospitality, construction and manufacturing. In a speech today, shortly, Work and Pensions Secretary Mel Stride is expected to say that the UK has relied on foreign labour for too long and that he's determined to put that right. It comes after the Home Office announced a number of restrictions to cut the number of people entering the country and ahead of official net migration statistics being published this week. Mel Stride told GB News this morning that this is a big opportunity for the domestic workforce.
I've set up a cross-ministerial task force that will be looking at making those kind of changes to the way the labour market works in those sectors to encourage and increase the supply of labour into them. We did that with HGV licences and drivers, if you remember, back in 2021 when we had 33 different changes which even in the short term really freed up labour supply. So those are the kind of things that I'm going to be talking about today.
And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
It's 11:07. It is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So breaking news this morning, the High Court has ruled the government unlawfully gave police stricter powers at protests, which cause more than minor, that's the quote, disruption to the public.
The legal action was brought by Liberty, the civil rights group, and they took the action against the Home Office.
So Mark White is here to tell us now what happened, Mark.
Well, it seems a significant judgment that has been handed down here that is a blow, there's no doubt, against the government. This is legislation that was effectively pushed through, or at least they tried to push it through under Suella Braverman. That was voted out, though, in the Lords, and instead they still pushed the legislation through under what's known as a statutory instrument, so effectively bypassing that primary legislation to allow this law to come in. And this law effectively meant that police, in weighing up the disruptive element of these protests that we see from Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil and alike, they could measure the threshold for what was considered serious disruption to community life from significant and prolonged, which is what it should be, to more than minor. Clearly, Liberty, in taking this to the court, decided that this was completely unfair, passing legislation by the back door, and the judges, for the most part, appear to have agreed with Liberty.
And so, legislation by the back door in what respect, Mark? Just
in the sense that it was going through as primary legislation in Parliament, it was voted down by the Lords. Instead of going into this parliamentary ping-pong that we've seen with Rwanda, the more expedient route was taken, which was to pass a statutory instrument.
Which you can do in just like that.
And this was the Public Order Act, wasn't it? Because I remember at the time this being passed and being pretty outraged that it felt like a creeping authoritarian government. Because this isn't recent. The Act wasn't recent. This is nothing to do with the Palestine marches, is it?
No, you're right. This is a public order bill, and it came in response to the very significant disruption over a long period of time that we were seeing from groups like Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion, when they were blocking main motorways, town centres and alike. There was a great deal, it has to be said, of public support for a tougher stance, against the disruption these groups were causing. And against that backdrop, you had Suella Braverman that pushed through, or tried to push through, the public order bill, but an element of that was rejected by the Lords. As I say, out of, it seems, political expediency, they just pushed it through anyway, using this statutory instrument.
The Labour Party was opposed to it, as I recall.
Yes, indeed.
And they could have played parliamentary ping-pong, but it could have gone backwards and forwards for weeks. So if they hadn't used this procedure called a statutory instrument, Mark, this would never have gone to court, presumably?
I think that's absolutely right. If it had gone through the proper system and was primary legislation at the end of the day. I mean, to be fair to Suella Braverman, you can, if you just cast your mind back to what we were reporting on as a channel at that time, was day after day of very significant disruption, reporting on the fact that ambulances in some cases were being blocked going to hospital. There was outrage by many people in the country.
Shared by me.
So you can see the pressure that Suella Braverman was under. But she took an expedient route here, and now the government, the Home Office, is paying the price.
Which was signed off by the Cabinet. Can't just blame her. It was signed off by the entire Cabinet and the Prime Minister.
But now they've got the headache, really, to decide what do they do here. Do they try to actually continue with this bill, which obviously, clearly, Liberty and others have said, regardless of the route to expediency of going to a statutory instrument and pushing this through, actually what's contained in this is very worrying. in terms of the chilling effect it has on the ability of people to carry out protests when it's effectively handing so much power to the police to use, very limited disruption carried out by people as an excuse to shut down legitimate protest. So there is that side to the argument as well. It will be up to the Home Office. We're waiting to hear from them now as to what their next move will be, whether they will try and push ahead.
It's interesting because it comes out in the same week that Lord Warney's report is coming out, which says that protests like Just Stop Oil, we talked about it yesterday on the programme, where they cause economic damage and hurt to businesses, that there should be a mechanism by which the small cafe, the shop, can get compensation from the protesters. And some of these protests are very well funded.
Yeah, I mean, it's highly topical. It's not gone away as an issue, and it is only, becoming more of an issue of concern for many people around the country, as we see, for instance, the pro-Palestinian protests that have been taking place on a regular basis. So there is definitely, a clamour out there for some kind of action to be taken that can ensure that the levels of disruption that these protests cause is perhaps not as significant as has been faced in the past. But it's that balancing act, weighing up the fundamental rights we have as a free democracy to allow people to go out and to protest on what they see as legitimate subjects.
You never know when you're going to need it.
Balancing that up against the disruption to people's everyday lives.
Absolutely. You never know when you're going to need the rights to protest. I, for one, am applauding this decision this morning.
I'm not.
Right, the government will outline its plans to compensate the victims and families of the infected blood scandal later today.
The inquiry found that boys, this is shocking, at Lord Mayor Treloar College in Hampshire were used as objects for research, guinea pigs in other words. Only 30 of the 122 pupils with haemophilia at the school in the 1780s are still alive today.
So one of the pupils who died was the son of Angela Newcombe, and Angela, we're delighted to say, joins us now. Good morning, Angela. Thank you so much. What a long journey you have had with this issue. A lot of people are coming to this for the first time, actually, this week, which I'm sure must be infuriating to you in many ways. You just tell us what happened to Neil, if you don't mind going back. What was his condition and what happened in terms of his treatment?
We had a letter of invitation really for him to join Treloar's College when he was 9, out of the blue. We live right down here in North Devon, offering this lovely opportunity to join the college with a treatment unit on site. And obviously he went and was going to help towards the petrol and the uniform. And it was in an ideal situation for him. And we thought he would really benefit from going to Treloar's. Unknown to us, there were trials being conducted there.
And how old was he at the time, Angela, when he went to the school?
Pardon?
How old was he at the time then, when he went to the school?
He joined Treloar's when he was 9.
Right.
He was quite young. There were quite one or two, perhaps a little bit younger than Neil, but he was 9. He wasn't a tall boy, and his nickname was Lofty for his colleagues. And he was always Lofty to his colleagues, to his mates up there.
And did the experiment on your son, Angela, as best you know, did it start straight away?
I haven't got the paperwork. I'm not sure, but it has been traced, yes, when he was infected and when we were informed. I think it's about a 3 or 4 year gap. But he joined when he was 9 and he was informed. He's one of those boys, I think it's been on previous news bulletins, they were called into a room in groups of 5 and pointed, you have, you haven't. He was one of those boys.
How terrible.
And Angela, just who do you hold responsible? Do you hold some individuals personally responsible in your mind?
For the cover-ups, I blame Kenneth Clark. He had the power to cover these things, and he's denied what actually did happen to our children. And or the civil servants who allowed the Factor 8 to come into this country when the Americans weren't going to use it themselves anymore, but we still bought it in, from my understanding, because it was such a surplus and it was cheaper to bring into this country. And it's all in Sir Brian's report, the circumstances, what I'm trying to express. So there was the factor 8 shouldn't have come in because it was saw some dubious people, wasn't it? Drug addicts, prisoners, sex workers.
Sure. Angela, can you bear to tell us what actually happened to Neil, how quickly he got sick and how long he was sick for?
I think it was 17, 18. He was told when he was 16, but then he was very angry. A young lad of 16 being told you got HIV. And so coping with that, he was very angry and living with all the stigma. He got into a fight in our local park where they was taking the mickey out of him, some of the other boys. And his brother Matthew stepped in. That was one little issue he had to cope with. But yes, it's not a good death, is it? You can imagine dying from AIDS from other previous people you've followed in life. He lost his hair, he lost weight, he became doubly incontinent, he became paranoid, he lost a bit of his mobility. But he was always Neil.
How old was he, Angela, when he died?
22. 22. A week after his 22nd birthday.
So he lived with it for 6 years, at least.
The chronic side of it, I was my thinking. But he was such a lively boy. If he was here now, he'd be like his brother. He'd have a nice car, hopefully a family, and that's what hurts me. He's home in my local Torrington, where I come from in North Devon, in the local cemetery. That's what, that's the basics of it all, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we hope you find something.
Just ask you one thing, Angela, because the government is going to announce a compensation scheme today, but money can never bring your son back, can it?
No, it's bittersweet. Bittersweet. There's sadness. The validation's there. I'm pleased that we've got that from Sir Brian's report, which was, but no, I want my son back. If I could.
I know.
Any day, ever back, because he's got it would been a different life for him, different life for myself. They can't bring the boys back.
That's right. You've done, and you're doing a great job of raising awareness, Angela, of the scandal, and hopefully lessons will be learned into the future. Angela Newcombe there, who lost her son
So
Neil.
sorry for your loss.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. A spokesperson for Trelaw College said, "We're devastated that some of our former pupils were so tragically affected and hope the findings provide some solace. The report lays bare the systemic failure at the heart of the scandal."
Can I just say what I said last time? Tragically affected. They died. They were killed.
Breaking news. At least one person has died and several others have been injured after a plane from London experienced severe turbulence. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, has more. What's happened, Mark?
Well, this is an extremely serious story. I've never heard of anyone ever dying as a result of a plane hitting turbulence. Very common, of course, for aircraft to encounter turbulence. Severe turbulence has been known to cause some serious injuries in the past, but this is of a degree so much higher than that. One person, we're told, dead, 20 others have been injured. This was a Singapore Airlines flight that had taken off from London Heathrow last night, just after 10 o'clock last night, heading for Singapore. It encountered severe turbulence, we're told, in an area of heavy thunderstorms. And as a result of that, clearly those injuries and that death occurred. The aircraft was forced to make an emergency landing to divert to Thailand, to Suvarnabhumi International Airport in Bangkok. As it landed there, reports that there were, as you would imagine, emergency services, a fleet of ambulances waiting on the tarmac for the Singapore Airlines, a 777 flight, so clearly 777, Boeing 777, one of the newer jumbo jet designs, good safety record, used now by many airlines around the world. Remember, of course, it was the 747 jumbo jet we would see in these long-haul routes. Now the majority of these long-haul routes are serviced by the likes of the Boeing 777. But as I say, information coming through to us now of this tragedy in the air, which, as I say, is very significant. I've never heard of anyone having died. I may be wrong, but I've just never heard of anyone dying as a result.
Singapore Airlines flight, it was SQ321 operating from Heathrow to Singapore, encountered severe turbulence en route. One fatality and several injuries.
I'll bring you more on that throughout the day. Now, still to come, do you know what D-Day is? Well, apparently more than half of young people don't. Shame on them. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark Dolan, and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Well, Welsh farmer Gareth Wyn-Jones is a first-language Welsh speaker and joins us now. Gareth, I mean, a lot of people will be thinking, hang on, this guy is a Welsh teacher. He speaks English. He knew what was on the parking ticket. He's just trying to make a point. He's being a prat, isn't he?
No, hey, come on, mate. I'm a first language Welsh. It's important that we watch after our language and, you know, that everything's bilingual. For us in Wales, you wouldn't go to France and expect your ticket to be in English, would you? You know, English is the most spoken language, but let's watch after these small languages. It's part of our cultural. So, you know what, I take my hat off to the guy. Fair play to him for go out and to fight this. But what it's done is put it onto the mainstream media, and you're talking about it, even that you're calling them that. You know, at least we're having a discussion about it, and it's putting the Welsh language in the forefront. And, so, you know, Gareth, speaking Welsh is important.
Yeah, so Gareth, this is a matter of principle. Is there a sense that the Welsh language is being eradicated in Wales? Is this something that the Welsh people need to rise up against?
Well, Welsh Government are trying to, you know, bring a lot more Welsh speaking into our daily life and teach people how to speak Welsh. Well, everything should be bilingual then. And I think, you know, it should start with government. So government should be putting pressure on these companies to make sure everything is bilingual. So I get behind this guy. Fair play to him. It's a good stance, and it puts it in the public eye. Let's have everything in both languages, especially Welsh, because that's my first language. And I'm
you know what? If I was Welsh, if I were Welsh, I think I would agree with you. I think I would agree with you, Gareth.
It depends if you come from Wrexham.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes. Thank you for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News with Dubes & Co from 6, followed by Farage at 7. At 8, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg addresses the state of the nation. And at 9, join Patrick Christie's Tonight, followed by Headliners at 11. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 11:25. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
We've got Nigel Nelson, our senior political commentator, and the former Labour MP, Luciana Berger, and you are both very welcome. Dangerous dogs, XL bully dogs.
Another woman mauled to death, Luciana. We thought we'd seen the end of this when these regulations came in on these dogs. It hasn't completely worked, has it?
It hasn't worked at all. And I was looking at the numbers. Over 20 people have lost their lives in the last 2 years alone. And I was reflecting back on the campaigns that I was involved in when I was in Parliament. And when I was the Member of Parliament for Liverpool Wavertree, I had not one but 2 constituents that were tragically killed by these animals, and was involved in a massive campaign, largely driven by our postal workers who are on the coalface of being, facing these dogs on a daily basis. And in a debate over 10 years ago, I read out the names of people that have been killed in this country, and it feels like we're just like in this cycle of at what point are we actually going to take action to make sure that people aren't being killed? It's quite extraordinary.
I mean, these dogs were her own dogs, so you could argue, well, it's her choice if she wants to have these dangerous dogs in her house. That's a choice that she was able to make.
I think we've seen that it's these dogs in particular, these bully dogs, that are killing humans in this country. And it, I think, really shines a spotlight on the fact that the regulations so far are not making a difference. We also know that while a number of thousands of people, I think it's around 30,000 people, have registered their dogs, it's estimated that between 15 and 20,000 people have not registered their dogs in their country. I mean, obviously it's an estimate. We don't know what the numbers are.
What's the answer then, Luciana?
Well, I think there's lots of things that we need to do. I mean, for a long time we've been calling for tougher sentencing. Certainly, the sentences have got stronger, but I don't think they still serve as enough of a deterrent. And we need to do far more when it comes to breeding these animals as well. And we haven't seen the regulations come forward to really hold people to account and actually have the people in place to identify where this breeding is taking place. At the moment, our police kennels are spending thousands and thousands of pounds when they're having to kennel these animals, when they do identify them. But there's so much that could be done to prevent them getting into people's hands in the first place.
Nigel? We're clearly not doing it enough. I don't know what the solution is.
And I think the root of the problem is the fact that we put through the Dangerous Dogs Act back in the 90s, when dogs seemed to be eating everybody. It was never thought out. Vets aren't able to use it properly, so they're saying what you need to do is a complete overhaul of the Act, to have tougher penalties when people breach the regulations set down. I mean, bear in mind, the dogs we're talking about here were registered dogs. But what vets are saying is the others who aren't registered, they have to put down. Bully XLs aren't a breed, so all they've got is a description the government have given them of the dog, and they're not quite sure whether they're putting a dog down that should be put down, shouldn't be. Everything is such a mess. That's why the law itself needs a complete review.
Shouldn't they be put down? Is that too draconian?
I think if a dog has killed someone...
But
even if they haven't, I mean, these dogs are potentially killers.
They are potentially killers, and that's why they've been banned and why people are registering them, but people are being encouraged to hand them in.
Yeah.
And not enough of people are doing so. And I don't think people are made aware of the dangers. So, as someone who follows it very closely, I've seen all the stories over more than a decade now. But, I think it's fair to say that people, might not see all those individual stories and the cumulative impact of what each of these dogs are doing.
I don't understand why anybody would want a dog like that.
Well, I mean... There's some people that genuinely don't understand, or because they're not told and they're not informed, because they're buying their dogs from illegal breeders who are not responsible and who are not sharing with the people that are purchasing these animals the danger that they can impose either on people outside their home or on actually their owners themselves. And too many of these stories, these tragic stories that are impacting too many families across this country, are where people, as we've just heard in the last 24 hours, who themselves own the dogs and are then killed by their own pet.
Right, let's talk about Labour's plans for housing. Nigel Nelson, Angela Rayner. Brave choice, one might say, to announce a housing story.
Well, she is Shadow Housing Secretary.
Correct, but at the moment, you would think...
Issues about her own ex-houses?
Well, there's always that, but that's his portfolio, so...
Well, true, but it makes it a little awkward, doesn't it? But anyway, she's going to announce the site for a series of new houses, new towns.
New towns is the idea. I mean, it's based on the post-war plan. We had various new towns, Harlow being one of them, one in another one. And the idea is to do this to get a commitment, or to fulfil a commitment for 1.5 million new homes in the first 5 years of a Labour government. Now, there's going to be some controversial aspects to this, because some of it involves on building on green belt, although what Labour are calling it now is grey belt. So these are things like a car park might be designated green belt, or wasteland can be green belt. You find where these pockets are and use those for the land.
Sounds great.
I think it's really important. I think, particularly when we see house building at some of its, lowest levels since before the war.
Since the Blair years.
Since before the Blair years.
Blair years were pretty low house building.
We are at the lowest levels that we've seen since before the 1940s. And actually what we can learn from the history of our country is how we can, as a government, or how our governments could and should turbocharge our economy by actually laying the foundations to have this growth. We have a housing crisis in this country. We do not have enough homes. I think the ambition is very ambitious, but it's an important one, because we need those 1.5 million homes. And why is it's the opposition today that's in Leeds at this UK Reef conference making this announcement, and that we've seen nothing come forward from this government?
How do you get round, though, the old NIMBY charge? Luciana, great idea, Newtown. Oh, but not here. Could cost us
Well,
votes.
we've
I mean,
got
how are you going to get around
the
that?
evidence of those new towns like Milton Keynes where they have been done. And they have been built, and they've been built to great effect. And actually, I think we find ourselves in a place now when I have conversations with people that people accept that we desperately need new homes. We've got a growing population. We've got people that that previously might have lived more people in a household. We've now got more single households. We desperately need more homes in all parts of the country. And for all the jobs that this will create and the economy, the positive impact it will have on our economy, it's absolutely critical. We need that investment. And I think from all the conversations I've had, people are really welcoming this.
Yeah, as long as I hope they're the right kind of houses. They need to be brilliantly insulated so people have low bills and even maybe generating some of their own power.
And 40% will be affordable.
Yes, the commitments we've heard from the Labour Party today are to that effect. They're saying that they're going to be sustainable homes, not ones that need to be retrofitted in the next 5-10 years' time. They are homes for the future, and that they're going to be built in a way that that they are good homes, that they are good quality, and they're affordable homes too. That 40%, I think, that gold standard that Labour set out is really, really important to ensure that we've got the social housing, the affordable housing, different types of tenure as well.
Yeah, super. Right, Luciana, Nigel, thank you so much.
Lovely to have you,
again.
Luciana. I hope you're going to come and see us again.
Oh, maybe you invite me.
We will, for sure.
Right, that's it for now, but here's your latest news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you. First, the top story this hour. As we've been hearing, breaking news, a passenger has died during turbulence on a flight from London to Singapore. The plane was forced to divert back to Bangkok. Singapore Airlines has confirmed a number of people have also been injured. It says there were a total of 211 passengers and 18 crew on board. This is a developing story. We'll bring you more on this as we get it. In other news, victims of the infected blood scandal will find out today how the government will compensate them when it makes a statement in the House of Commons. The Prime Minister apologised yesterday after the infected blood inquiry published its final report into the scandal, blaming failures on successive governments, the NHS and blood services. Since the 1970s, 30,000 people were infected with HIV and hepatitis through contaminated blood products and transfusions. Around 3,000 have since died. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has pledged to pay victims back as part of a £10 billion package. The Prime Minister says illegal migration has become truly one of the defining issues of our time as he visits Vienna for talks with the Austrian Chancellor about the issue. The Prime Minister has said the two are deepening cooperation on illegal migration and agreed that schemes like the UK's Rwanda plan are needed to tackle the issue in Europe. Their meeting comes as the government promised an extra £25 million for the National Crime Agency to tackle people smuggling gangs. The High Court has ruled that the regulations which lowered the threshold for police intervening in protests were unlawful. Civil liberties group Liberty brought legal action against the Home Office over protest regulations last year. The government measures lowered the threshold for what is considered serious disruption to community life. They also allowed police officers to take into account any relevant cumulative disruption of repeated protests. And a woman has died after a dog attack in a house in East London, while police seized 2 XL bullies from the property. The Metropolitan Police says the victim was in her 50s and the incident happened yesterday afternoon. Officers say she was pronounced dead at the scene and the 2 registered dogs were seized after being contained in a room. From the 1st of February this year, it became a criminal offence to own the XL bully breed in England and Wales without an exemption certificate. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2718 and €1.1698. The price of gold is £1,901 and 26 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 8,386 points.
Cheers Britannia Wine Club proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Up at noon, Emily and Tom will be here with Good Afternoon Britain. They're here to tell us all about it. What's coming up, guys?
Well, goodness me, this aeroplane, a flight from London to Singapore, a Boeing plane, a 777, a very safe aircraft. A passenger has died after the plane encountered turbulence. An extraordinary story, more developing details coming about every minute, but hugely concerning for anyone thinking of going on holiday this year.
Yes, we hope we can find out exactly what happened. 1 passenger dead, that's what we know. Dozens injured, according to the latest reports. So we'll get some expert analysis of what might have happened on board that flight, but terrifying.
It would
terrible.
That it was instant turbulence if people didn't have their seatbelts on, wouldn't it?
That's what you would think.
And maybe the person who sadly lost their life might end up being cabin crew, who was perhaps walking
We're told
around
it was
the
a
plane.
passenger.
It was a passenger.
Was it?
Gosh,
So
yeah.
it really does. I mean, the details are sketchy at this stage, but the plane's made an emergency landing, not at its final destination. So we're going to learn a lot more as the show goes on, but it really does highlight some of the dangers out there. I mean, I think this is an experience that most people will have had in their lives.
Sure.
I've been in mild turbulence, but nothing where I would have expected.
That sounds like an absolute nightmare.
And I don't think it's unprecedented. I've never heard of this happening before.
Certainly not from a flight going from Britain, from London, in a safe plane.
Yeah.
From a developed city to a developed city.
Country. Yeah, Singapore, perhaps.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll find out more about that story as it developes. We're also going to have Rishi Sunak. I know you've been talking about him this morning. We're going to have his exclusive interview.
Did he leave our Catherine Forster hanging?
I think he might have done. Who knows? But yes,
it was a bit of a rush, but she did get more time with him than was expected. So less time in all of the fluff around it, more time for the actual interview.
And we'll look forward to seeing it.
But this also, as well, and perhaps we'll speak about this during the show, this High Court ruling against the government on these protest powers, very interesting indeed. On the day that we're expecting this report to be published on cracking down on protests further. Yeah. So lots of mixed messages coming out through the legal system, and we await that report too.
I'm not.
Of course I am. You never know when you might want to protest. Be careful what you wish for.
Yes, this is the Liberty Group, who aren't great fans of the government, as you can imagine. And yes, of course, we will be finding out what that compensation is for the victims of the blood scandal.
Emily and Tom here from Midday. Don't go anywhere. Quick break.
Free Speech Nation. Sunday nights from 7 p.m.
Yes, has common sense won the day at the NHS? Yes, so someone seems to have woken up and realised people are more interested in the NHS making sick people better than calling them by the correct pronoun. Health Secretary Victoria Atkins is making changes to the NHS constitution, which will see phrases like chest feeding and people with ovaries outlawed. Even Keir Starmer is getting on board.
To get the clarity, is it right or is it wrong for Rosie Duffield to say only women have a cervix?
Well, look, biologically, she, of course, is right about
that.
So
do you owe her an apology?
Well,
yes. Do you owe her an apology? This has been somewhat ongoing. But actually, question, the NHS constitution, my understanding is it has to be changed or ratified by the health sector every 10 years.
Yeah.
So it feels like this is coming more from the government and not actually coming from the NHS at all.
Oh, you mean because it's just time? It's just like it's time to have a look at the lease sort of thing. The 10 years are up.
But it's just that also a lot of NHS leaders are kind of saying, oh, no, we should not do this or there's going to be complications. It feels like it's not coming. It feels like the NHS is still institutionally captured and this is the government going, finally, no, enough is enough. Sex matters.
Right, yeah. So, OK, so I said there was nothing Rishi could do. I mean, this helps, doesn't it? It's time. It's time. That was fun watching that. I'd like that to have gone on a bit longer. I think the bit I was really going to enjoy was when he did or didn't give his apology. That's what I'd like to
Well, also, I think they should have just brought Rosie Duffield in. We've got Rosie here!
Oh, fantastic. Yes, like a sort of 90s Cilla Blacks.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Matthew, tonight, I'm Rosie Duff.
Yes.
I'm dry ice.
Surprise. What's the question? Has common sense prevailed?
Well,
yes,
but you say it's got... That's my fear of it.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive?
Incompetent? That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 11:42 with Britain's News on GB News. Andrew Pearson, Bedturn. You've been the breaking news this hour.
That's right. We've been hearing this morning a passenger has died during turbulence on a flight from London to Singapore.
The plane was forced to divert to Bangkok. Singapore Airlines has confirmed a number of people were also injured. It says there were a total of 211 passengers and 18 crew on board. We're trying to find out how many Brits have been affected.
We're going to follow this story throughout the day on GB News. Now, in other news, the government will outline its plans to compensate the victims and families of the infected blood scandal later today.
Well, let's talk to Des Collins, a senior partner of Collins Solicitors, which is representing more than 1,500 victims. Des, good morning to you. Can I ask, how on earth does anybody quantify what a family or a loved one is entitled to in terms of compensation if somebody has died, loss of income, loss of dignity, the terrible stigma that many people who died of AIDS and in the 80s would have gone through? How can you put a figure on it? How do they work it out?
It can be done. It's done by the courts all the time. It's a lengthy, complicated process, but the machinery, legal machinery, is there to do it. One of the things that does concern us in this case is that there are so many people who will be queuing up for compensation, and it's going to take a long time to work through it. Now, we've been saying this to the government for certainly for 2 years now. The government put in place a report from Robert Francis outlining how it might work, compensation. And that report has basically sat on a Whitehall shelf for over 2 years, and no one's done anything with it. If moves had been made earlier, we wouldn't be facing the logjam, which I suspect we're going to hit this afternoon.
Well, I thought there was quite a significant exchange in the Commons yesterday, Des, when the Prime Minister was pressed about would this compensation be paid before the end of the year, and classic politician, we didn't get a proper response. It seems to me like this is going to be kicked down the road again, and the compensation will be on the next government's watch, which we are expecting to be a Labour government.
I think that's probably right. I think the history or the track record of this administration is that it has tried to kick compensation for infected blood down the road for as long as it can, and I think a lot of pious aspirations as to we'll do it quickly, we'll do it now, we apologise, it was our fault, and we're going to put it right. I'd like to see what comes out this afternoon. I'm not over hopeful.
Des, do you have any idea how much individuals might be expected in terms of compensation? Is it too early to tell?
It's too early to tell, and it's got to be individually classified or categorised, because if you take an 18-year-old who might have a football career for 20 years, earn more than you and I could dream of ever earning. You get the same child doing manual work, the compensation is going to be a lot lower. So it's just got to be worked out case by case.
Yeah, OK. Well, we wish you the best of luck with it. Des Collins, our senior partner of Collins Solicitors, who's representing more.
It's just appalling, isn't it? Kicking it down the road again. Kicking the can down the road.
I'm wondering, I don't think we've kind of got to the bottom of it. Who has pushed it forward now?
Well, Theresa May set up the inquiry.
Well, good for her.
Yeah.
Well done, Theresa May.
Much criticism of what many things she did, but in 2017 she said to be an inquiry. Of course, it's taken forever, the inquiry, because they always do. But if you think this has been around since the 90s, it's been a problem.
That's what I mean.
The Mail on Sunday exposed this over 30 years ago.
And every government just thought, we'll leave it to the next one to deal with. It's too messy.
Cameron.
Well done, Theresa May.
So
is it coincidental as it was a woman that finally got this rolling along?
Exactly. But the compensation, you heard what Des was saying. I thought it was a really interesting exchange. I'm surprised it wasn't picked up more. One of the Labour MPs said, will it be by the end of the year? No reply.
No.
Which means it won't be.
Right, don't go anywhere. We're going to bring you the latest updates after this breaking news story about a passenger who has died on a flight from London to Singapore. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather update. It's certainly a cooler day today and it will be turning more unsettled as a risk of thunderstorms develops, and there'll likely be some heavy rain through the rest of today but also into Wednesday. That's because an area of low pressure is slowly developing out across Europe, and that's going to push up towards the UK, bringing heavy rain to eastern areas. But for the time being, we have had some sunshine to start across the west, but that sunshine is going to allow some thunderstorms to develop, particularly across southwestern England, parts of Wales and Northern Ireland. We've got weather warnings in force here. We could also see some heavy, slow-moving showers across southeastern areas of England as well. So many places will be a couple of degrees cooler than yesterday, but we could still reach 20 or 21 degrees across the far northwest of Scotland. And through this evening, those showers are going to continue to move quite slowly, so they could bring quite a lot of rain in a short space of time. Some heavy showers across the far north of Scotland. They shouldn't bring too much disruption, but they could bring some pretty unpleasant conditions for a while. Heavy showers continuing across the western areas of Northern Ireland, so that could bring some disruption on the roads for those of you travelling this evening, as well as across Wales and the southwest, where they could be particularly slow moving. So do take care if you're travelling through this evening. Take a closer look at the weather warnings on our website if you'd like to. Now, through this evening, this heavy rain wrapped around an area of low pressure will push into eastern areas of England. That's going to become a more dominant feature through Wednesday. So some heavy rain across northeastern England and some low cloud, mist and fog across the eastern coast of Scotland as well. But plenty of cloud around and heavy rain. So it's going to be another mild start to the day on Wednesday, but there'll be less in the way of sunshine as that heavy rain continues to pivot around this area of low pressure and become more persistent, pushing up into parts of Scotland, covering much of northern parts of the UK by the afternoon on Wednesday. We could also see some heavy showers breaking out across the south coast, and once again with plenty of rain and cloud, it's going to be another cool feeling day.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Gloria Di Piero. This is GB News, Britain's election channel.
Very good morning. We are looking at this breaking news that a passenger's died on turbulence from a flight from London to Singapore. Nick has got in touch on gbnews.com/yoursay. And Nick says, I've flown out to Singapore dozens of times, and the turbulence over the Indian Ocean and the Himalayas was quite violent at times, with the plane dropping to up to 100 feet in a couple of seconds. On one occasion, whilst walking in the aisle, my feet momentarily left the floor with a feeling of weightlessness. On another occasion, a trolley decided to go for a run as the pilot attempted to climb to smoother air. And on another, the oxygen masks dropped down. So it's obviously a route that is subject to all sorts of turbulence. But apparently there was a storm at the time as well.
You still don't expect to hear that someone's died. So the plane was forced to divert to Bangkok. 30 people were hurt as well. One person died. It was a Boeing 777, left the UK on Monday. It's just, as we were talking earlier, you don't expect a plane that leaves Britain to fly to Singapore for this to happen. I've never heard of it before, this sort of thing.
It's that moment, isn't it, when you start to feel the plane shake.
Yeah.
You just start to feel it shake and you think,
oh,
something rattles in your glass. And then they will hopefully come round and say, can you just check you've got your seatbelt on the plane? And the fasten seatbelt sign comes on, you can't go to the loo. It's that moment. And sometimes we can be a little blasé about that, maybe, when the air stewards are coming down. You think, oh, there's no queue, I might just nip to the loo. Air turbulence is all right, isn't it? It's not going to be causing any problems. And then you look at a day like this, it's obviously been fatal for one person.
And also, so much stuff now is put in the overhead lockers. And if any of those were burst open, I mean, they are rammed now.
That's right.
With big bags, heavy bags, which can add to the problem when there's really bad disruption.
Yeah. There were 211 passengers on board. There were 18 crew on board. As far as we know, the fatality was actually a passenger and not, as I'd originally assumed, maybe an air steward walking around the plane.
Well, let's talk to Lisa Minot, who is the travel editor at The Sun. Lisa, this is frankly shocking.
It is very shocking, yes. I mean, although we do experience turbulence on flights a lot, it is highly unusual for somebody to actually lose their life in this way. In fact, there's only actually been 38 deaths since 2009 in total of the millions of flights that we take every year. So it is extremely unusual.
It just shows, Lisa, we were just saying that actually sometimes we can be a bit blasé when you sat in an aeroplane for your regular flyer, when they give you the instructions of where your exits are, people have their headphones in. It's a reminder that it can possess risks flying, even if it isn't about an aeroplane falling out of the sky.
Very much so, yes. I mean, this is why you're told all the time on airlines. I've literally just flown back from Cancun yesterday. You're advised to have your seatbelt on at all times, particularly on those overnight flights when perhaps you're going to fall asleep. You're not going to be paying attention in the same way that you normally would if a seatbelt light goes on. So having that seatbelt on at all times is really important. I mean, generally, it's more likely that you're going to be injured if you're a crew member, because obviously they're up and about, they're moving about the plane. But I mean, there is evidence we're seeing now that there is an increase in the number of really serious incidents of turbulence. Because of climate change, we've got jet streams that are moving faster, we've got higher winds, and with that comes the added, obviously, the added idea that there's going to be more chance of there being severe injuries from really severe turbulence. But it is only 3%. Only 3% of flights will experience even moderate turbulence. And it's tenths of a percent that will experience severe turbulence like this.
Lisa, thank you. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us at the very last minute. Lisa Minot, their travel editor at The Sun. Singapore Airlines has said they offer their deepest condolences to the families of the deceased. Tom and Emily are here now with Good Afternoon Britain.
And they'll have a lot more on this story as it unfolds.
We'll see you tomorrow.
That's right. Continued coverage of the Singapore Airlines flight. Taking off from London, one passenger dead. What has gone on? We're going to hear much more detail over the course of the next couple of hours.
And we will have that exclusive GB News interview with the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. What will he have to say about the debate over protests and, of course, his Stop the Boats pledge? We'll have all of that after your weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Morning. Here's your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. There's a chance of some heavy, persistent rain, particularly across the eastern parts tomorrow, but through today, we're talking about showers. We've already seen some showers developing, especially across parts of England, but these are going to become more widespread, more frequent, and pretty heavy as we go through the day. There's also the risk of some thunder, especially across parts of Northern Ireland and southwest England. Elsewhere, there will be quite a few showers around, also some bright or sunny spells. And in any sunshine, it should feel relatively warm, with temperatures peaking in the mid to high teens, possibly just about getting into the low 20s Celsius. More showers to come as we head towards this evening, and they are going to be pretty heavy for some of us, even across parts of Scotland, though they won't be especially frequent here. We could see some downpours. A decent amount of bright or sunny spells around, though towards eastern parts, holding on to a bit more cloud here. Plenty of showers, though, across parts of Northern Ireland, likely to see some disruption, especially on the roads. Could be a bit of surface water flooding. Also plenty of showers across many parts of England and and Wales, and here they could be heavy, possibly even thundery too. So do take care, especially if you're heading on the roads. As we go through overnight Tuesday into Wednesday, we are going to see more showery rain developing, and there's the potential for some more persistent rain to kick in across eastern parts as we go towards dawn on Wednesday as well. Quite a bit of cloud for many of us, so temperatures aren't going to drop a huge amount, but there could be some murkiness for some of us, some mist, some fog patches, a bit of low cloud in some spots. Tomorrow, the big talking point will be the heavy persistent rain. A bit of uncertainty as to how far west this is going to spread, but it is across eastern areas that it's most likely to be pretty wet here. Some heavy persistent rain. Meanwhile, further west, it's looking slightly drier, but some showery outbreaks, some bright or sunny spells though, and temperatures looking similar to today. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the biggest cash prize we've given away to date. An incredible £20,000 that you could use however you like. And because it's totally tax-free, every single penny will be in your bank account to do whatever you like with. £20,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours this summer. Hurry, you've got to be in it to win it. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand.